Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of the X Button, Season 3, Episode 26. I'm one of your hosts, Alejandro. With me is Goots himself.
Paul, hey everybody, how's it going? That is a good one. I'll take that.
Yeah, the big giant with a heart of gold, basically.
Yep. That is 100% me.
Yeah. How you doing, Paul? Like, how are you doing after yesterday?
I am emotionally distraught and exhausted, but also sitting back on all of, just like in any really good story that's finished up, you just kind of sit with it for a minute. You just kind of digest everything. You remember all of the characters. You remember everything that brought you to this point. And then you go, should I replay it?
Yeah. So, if the title of this episode didn't clue you in, this is once again another special episode of the X Button because we're doing a spoiler cast for Final Fantasy XVI, which Paul finished yesterday. I finished 2 days ago. My review went live today. So it's like, I definitely wanted to have a platform to be able to just say it all with this damn game, which I can't wait just to talk about more about that. But before we dive into that, just a reminder that this is the X Button Podcast, our gaming podcast that posts every Fridays from 2 p.m. onwards, God willing, available in the YouTube channel Escape Gaming, as well as most audio services around the world, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the like. You can find links and the RSS feed at tinyurl.com/escapegaming. If you enjoy our show, give us a like and subscribe. So, no news this week. There were a few, but I was like, they're so insignificant. I just really want to give all this time to this game that has been part of my psyche since the demo on I think it was on June 12 or June 13 when we got the demo, and then we had to wait so long for it and then play
At least
through
it was
it.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
But man, was that a long 2 weeks.
Yeah, because it came out on a Monday and we had to wait for not that Thursday but the next Thursday, almost like a weekend change for that. And
can you imagine in hindsight the kind of game that we thought we were going to get versus the game that we ended up getting?
Yeah, it's
I know we'll talk about it in the plot section, which we're going to, for anybody listening, we're not going to jump straight into spoilers. We're probably going to go through a good 50 to 75% of this talk without spoilers, so fear not, and we'll warn you when we do.
Yeah, because now I think we are giving our full review impressions of this, which includes the spoiler section of it with the plot, and this being a very story heavy game and emphasis on story heavy. That's part for the core. So if you're listening to this and you still haven't finished this game, which depending on how you're playing it, because there's some people that can get this through this in 30 or 35 hours if they're just mainlining, or if they do literally everything. That was me.
70,
80 hours. So my clock said 110, but I know for sure 10 of those hours I was just idle listening to the music. So but yes, overall, Paul, let's just give our full thoughts of this. My reviews out there. I want to hear your thoughts because it was interesting. I tell you, as someone that we had this ongoing chat outside the show, seeing the evolution of your thoughts towards this game, towards very specific sections, and what your thoughts are now that the whole thing is done. And I feel the same way, but I want to hear, what do you think of overall of Final Fantasy XVI?
So let me break it down, because for anybody listening, as y'all would know, this was my number one most anticipated title of
my number 6. This was my number 6.
So this is the one I was I was ready to die on that hill after the last trailer that I saw, and then especially after the demo. I was super sold out for this game. I was ready. I was all set, and I had a roller coaster
literal
all the way through it. Already the game is the epitome description of what a roller coaster would be in a game, from mechanics, gameplay, set pieces to plot. But even in a meta sense, I was riding super high. I was really dropping into some valleys. There were some points where I just wanted to take a break from the game, but I am pleased to know that if you can sit through the parts of it that just you don't vibe with, and you just accept okay, I'm not going to enjoy this part, get through it to go to the next, go back to that if it's a map, just go back to that part of the map, If it's a certain thing about it, you just don't worry, it's going to pass, and you're not even going to remember moments like that. And there's very few games I can say, don't worry, because by the end, you're not going to really care as much about those moments.
Yeah.
But this is one of those games that I can tell you, just promise me to power through to the very end of that game and really try to see it for what it is, because while it started off really high and I dropped into like a 7.5 at one point because I was really frustrated as a working adult, not really getting progress in certain areas of the game that are a lot more dialogue heavy, but not like cool cutscenes with cinematography. It's just walls of text and exposition. But at the same time, once you can get through those, I had the time of my life and ended up, I would say, do we want to talk like
Say it.
numeric? Okay, so
Yeah,
I
say
think
it.
I landed at a solid 9.
High five. You can read my review. I landed at a 9, and me, I feel like, for example, for a while I was at an 8.5 because this game has, like, when the story hooks you and when the mechanics are like at its best, and it's all mixed with the spectacle, the sonoric like euphoria of its soundtrack, like all together, it bounces from being like the greatest thing you're ever experiencing to something that you're like, god damn it, this like slog, like, why am I have to go pick up this sand after I had the most epic boss fight that I've ever seen in a game in this like extended fetch quest, and why is that, why am I in this like dull looking place for extended period of time with a villain that constantly preaches at you, that to then suddenly be like, holy crap, I cannot believe what I've just witnessed. I cannot believe how emotionally this hit. That,
Yeah.
and the thing is that those lows are worth blasting the game for. At the same time, the highs of this game are probably the highest highs I've ever felt in a game, like ever, to the point that they're so high that the absolutely crap that is like the low points don't even matter whenever you see everything, because what sticks in your mind are the things that this is spectacle to the level that I never expected to see in a game, or to be wowed with a game like now after almost 30 years gaming and feeling like we had peaked at a certain point. It's like some of the things that you see in this game like are beyond like it feels like something that only belongs in anime, or something or something that just belongs in someone's mind and imagination. That the fact that we're able to see it at the level it was executed, and for the story that even though there were some themes that they didn't quite see through to the end in the main like in the main thread, that how true it stays to the strength of its characters and the emotions and the feelings of everything, that then by the time like the credits roll, I was a sobbing mess. I literally was sobbing at the end of this. So
It was it's a game that I can best liken to a really good concert. If you have an artist that you really like, you go to their concert, and we're talking one of the really long ones that's like 40 to 50 songs that they'll play throughout the course of like 4 or 5 hours or something. There's always going to be like that one moment, that intermission, that interlude, that part of the song that you just don't really like all that much, but it's like you're there for the whole thing. You're not just going to walk out in the middle of that part of the thing and go, wow, what a crappy ending to that. It's like, buddy, you've got another 2 hours of concert left. So like, for naturally you would sit through all of that, and by the end you get to the big finish, you get the finale, you get the fireworks, all the craziness, and then you think, wow, that was really awesome. You don't even remember that one moment where you wanted to check out and go to the bathroom. That it's like this basically, where you sit in, you settle in, and you just commit. That is a word that I wouldn't attribute to most games for me sometimes, especially if I'm not feeling it, I'll just dip. But this is one of those games that holds you. It's a like promise to stick around because it's gonna hit. The orchestra is gonna kick in. You're gonna hear some genres you did not expect out of this. You're going to see some crazy particle effects. You're gonna hear some amazing voice acting, and you are going to just be on the floor by the end of it, whether from just being blown away or being an emotional mess.
yes, and now real quick, Paul, is it your game of the year?
I don't know. I think I need to sit with it more and
Hmm.
possibly play it a second time.
Yeah.
Right now, it is neck and neck. And if we had to break it down from one category to the next,
Hmm.
I would love to sit through between Tears of the Kingdom and this to just see battling it out which
Hmm.
genre, not genre, which like area each one wins out,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
like sum it up at the end almost.
Yeah. I would say like Tears of the Kingdom, like it's going to be the one that unanimously may win at the end of this, even though I feel like the conversation around it like has actually died down quicker than I was expecting. But it's more because the kind of year this is where so many banger stuff just keep dropping. And um, when Breath of the Wild came out, it felt like it was clearly towering around anything around it. So it felt like the conversation was more active around it. I feel like if you want to like break it down, like in just like in more like clear, what does this do and what does this other do? I feel in graphics, one is a clear winner, and then
Yeah.
in music, another one is a clear winner.
Yeah.
In mechanics, it gets muddy because one is
That's where it's
yeah,
subjective for a
that's
lot of
that's the
people.
subjective because it's like the mechanical complexity of one is completely different to the mechanical complexity on the other. The other one's all about game design, and the other is about combat design. So that's what diverges. And then in story, one has story, the other one
Yeah,
actually
it's
has more story than whatchamacallit, than
Breath
you
of
would
the Wild.
expect. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah. It has actually more story than you'd expect, but it's still like the least of that game's focus. Even though some of those story moments really hit, but this one is like really relies a lot on its narrative. And at the end of the day, like Zelda did something in its game design that it's gonna inspire a lot of that's gonna inspire a lot of game developers going forward because of showing the ways that when you put a lot of money and effort and time and thought into anything, how far you can push the medium even in limited hardware. With Final Fantasy, I feel like this pushes things in the more like in your face way. It's like just it's immediately prettier. It's like the things that you think are awesome are easier to get a grasp on, and then with Zelda, it's like when you're in it, you actually get what's awesome about it.
In I actually this might be a good point to bring this up because it makes me think. Imagine if you took the world and characters of Final Fantasy XVI and then you put that into the Legend of Zelda universe. I'm not saying like you'd have to
Mm-hmm.
make it like as dark or whatever gritty, just like add that depth of the characters, add that surrounding storyline
Mm-hmm.
of basically what we thought we were going to get with Breath of the Wild, where
Mm-hmm.
like everything's really gone to crap.
Yeah.
There's some kind of weird thing that seems to make people sick and die.
Uh-huh.
Seems very similar already. Like you could just take
Mm-hmm.
this and run with it. You take all these characters, you see Zelda's dad, the king of Hyrule, you do all these crazy things, you raise the champions,
Mm-hmm.
you've got them in your party. I feel like you would have a home run of a game out of that where you just take everything Legend of Zelda already has and then you just add the actual depth.
Mm-hmm.
Allow Link to interact with other characters for
Yeah,
once.
and it gets into like story depth in that case. And remember, it's like Zelda is like the Nintendo way of doing things is, um, you you build a game around an idea, a gameplay idea, and then you make a story that's as basic as you can get to go in a story, at least for things to just move. But that's not the focus. The focus is on the experience and the
Right.
gameplay and the things that you do, the things that makes those games infinitely replayable. With Final Fantasy is different because like it's all hinging on the story. It's like the game is built around like the narrative it tells you, the world building, the characters, and how all
It's
of that
really
is
like a
synergized.
sliding scale
Yeah,
of priority.
exactly.
On one extreme is Final Fantasy, on the other is Legend of Zelda.
Exactly, and it comes to preference. I feel from game design, I feel like we're at the point where game design can be the thing that pushes things into Game of the Year. However, the emotions that Final Fantasy gave me, and how that this damn game has stuck in my mind, those specific emotions, and the highs that I got, I think makes Final Fantasy 16 my current favorite game of this year.
I could understand that
Current, like I said,
100%.
current
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the year's still not done. There's Starfield happening, Spider-Man's gonna happen, and already I'm not excited. I already said that I'm not excited about that game for extraneous reasons.
Everybody in the comments flame him right now for this blasphemy. I just want y'all to just really back me up here.
Hey, you probably are part of the million that have clearly said that you're burned out on Marvel, which is I'm one of those now.
I am definitely there. I think there is one holdout, and that is Insomniac Spider-Man for what that did to me back in 2018. So
oh yeah,
it's funny, you and I had like a different 2018 game that like revamped our love for gaming.
Yeah, yours was Spider-Man.
And Spider-Man.
Yes. Yeah, and even then, like a game like Final Fantasy 16, there are many. I feel in many ways Final Fantasy 16 exposes the modern God of War games, in a way that
yeah.
At
we
least
can talk about that too, because we were talking about the idea of a game doing something that makes it like the craziest thing that we've ever seen done in a game. And poor God of War had that crown for
forever,
maybe half a year. No, I'm saying like from the God of War Ragnarok doing what it did, and we were talking about that, and then like just the next year, not even a full year after, we are getting at least 3 other games that do some really wild things that I didn't think was possible. So it's like it really makes me realize the limitations of the God of War games. Like now
the newer ones, because the scale of this game is God of War 3. The last time I remember being
absolutely, actually,
it's like, because I tell you, it's like the last time that I was actually awestruck at seeing a game play with detail and scale like it did, like just the Titan beginning, like the Titans climbing Mount Olympus, and how you're actually playing through all of that as it's happening. It was like that was a watershed moment in like gaming when it came to technology and how big a scale can happen. And since then, I haven't seen scale done as impressive as that. I felt what I enjoyed about God of War Ragnarok is how close it got, but it's still not even close to that. And that was the thing. It's like it reminded you, it's like it was getting close to showing you some of that grand adventure, but it was still paling in comparison to what God of War 3 did. This one not only meets but exceeds in scale some of the things that God of War 3 even did. So it's mind-boggling, and that's just part of like the visual presentation of the thing, which is like when you see the level of the size of like the Titan battle, which happens halfway through. We're getting now to tiny spoilers territory, not plot spoilers,
stuff that you would have seen in the trailers anyway.
Yes. But getting to see that, we kind of talked about it a little bit last week, as vague as I could be, but how that fight evolves, like from where it starts, and then just balloons in size, and then was it a rock song or was it like the Jet Set Radio style music?
It was like breakcore, like like lots of snare and cymbals, just weird, like almost hip hop vibe to it. And then the second stage of it going into like a heavy rock ballad, and then I think building back into the icon theme for that final set when the one specific part is happening. It's just like shifting genres for one boss fight like that twice is usually people stick to their guns. It's like, this is the theme for this whole region of this fight, and that's just what you're going to get. You're going to get a little bit of higher, a little bit of lower, and that's going to be it. But the fact that you're just breaking all of the rules of sound with stuff like that is just... But
it worked. And that's the thing. It worked in the context, especially like when you know that how your main character, which is Clive, is feeling at that moment, and why that music kind of changes in that moment, is that it shouldn't work, and it somehow does, and it's in concert with all that you're seeing. That's the thing, is like how the visuals and the music in this game just like work in concert, even when some of the themes are repeated, they always work. The music never failed to like give me chills every time I listen to it. It's like it gives an energy to like when you're playing. It gives an energy to everything that you're seeing. That is like, I tell you, it's like I'm gonna link some of the songs into the description. This is just for you to go listen to them, because it's just that kind of euphoric soundtrack that it has now become like my workout music. It literally fills me with energy, and I'm actually like now like jogging when I usually just go on walks, because it gives you that much energy. And here's like an interesting detail about the soundtrack by Masayoshi Soken, who did the soundtrack for Final Fantasy XIV and its expansions, and he's been beloved by the music he's been doing there. Many people have been like, man, he's doing such great music. We know people are not jumping into this MMO, even though a lot of people have jumped, but we know there's like that in general, a lot of people are just not gonna get to hear a lot of the things that many players that play 14 hear. They're like, what if only he could get his flowers? And 16 is where he gets that. And what's even more interesting, Paul, for example, from what I've learned, the Ifrit versus Phoenix song and the icon battles that happen a lot, he was doing it when he was fighting cancer.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine?
That will give you some wild motivation, I guess. But
exactly.
The fact that you can create that.
Yeah, and when you feel that, like when you know that he was fighting for his life at that point, like we're going through his therapies in the middle of the pandemic, while all of that was happening, because that's when we heard that he was diagnosed with that, and he's in remission now. But can you imagine kind of like being in that state of mind? And these are the emotions that his music like engenders from you when you're like fighting for your life against like this larger than size thing. It's like, tell me if it's not so inspiring and like so like powerful.
It adds a new layer to that music for sure, because it feels, it sounds like you're fighting with like, well, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out swinging. And that man composed something that epitomized the idea of, I'm going to create the most insane soundtrack if this has to be my last thing ever. And he nailed it. Just the way that the music changes from moment to moment, there's almost a retro feel to it in certain areas. Let me kind of clarify that. It's not like it sounds like specific instrumentals, but
here's the thing. It's funny you say retro, because so many Final Fantasy like key themes are like remixed in this game.
Yeah,
the crystal theme, the main theme are in this game. If you played all older Final Fantasy, you can like identify. You can hear a little bit of Sephiroth and some even though Soken didn't do the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack there, it's like he's taking a lot of the motifs that are so iconic to Final Fantasy, and it is what connects all these disparate games together. On top of like doing their own things, that it makes it feel retro that way, because it's like it evokes those games.
I think one of the specific examples of that, obviously, like you were saying, the Crystal theme, which is that very iconic, if you hear it you would know it kind of song, but also even like the desert area sounded very similar to like old Kingdom Hearts music going to Agrabah. It made me feel like, I feel like how I did back then when I was just running around in the world having fun with it, because a lot of games nowadays, they keep music on the back burner, where it's like, if you're running through the world, there's nothing, like there's no music because there's nothing happening, so there wouldn't be music playing.
Yeah, it's all more about ambience than like domination. Like my favorite song that played was in the Sambrique area, which is like the top right in the woods when you're getting you get out of Lost Swing into in between there. There's just something that has a very Nier Automata style of vibes. It's
kind of eerie, like haunted forest kind of look to it. But yeah, like that's almost what I'm saying. They hit that balance between not playing enough music, like once again, Tears of the Kingdom might be guilty of that. Or
very guilty.
Too much on like a loop, where some games are guilty of that as well. This is more like, it's kind of soft, but it's still ever present and it's there. And then the ability for you to almost, especially in your hideout, to change your jukebox and unlock all of that music to just listen to while you're running around at your home base is such a great idea. I love jukeboxes in hub areas because it just gives you this level of control over everything going on, that you can just really enjoy the kind of music you want to hear at that point. So I just had like a roulette wheel. I just kept going through whatever new song I'd unlocked. I'm just listening to that.
Yeah. I changed it based on the mood of where the story was.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing.
Probably a smarter thing to do than what I did, because some moments I'm just running around having fun. There's like heartbreaking like strings and piano, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel terrible. Why am I doing this? But it's just like gorgeous music at the same time.
Yeah, so you mentioned hubs. So a big key difference from Final Fantasy 16 to the very last one, which was 15, is that 15 was the first ever Final Fantasy open world. and it was an open world for like its 9 chapters before it became like a linear thing. This one, it's not quite an open world. This is actually more reminiscent to old school Final Fantasy of going into different hubs that eventually, like, the more you explore them, you see that they're more interconnected than they seemed. Because at first it feels like you're just being funneled through basically through tunnels.
Shocked by that, because I thought, especially when you first check it, and there's even in that one region, there's like 2 disparate areas, and I'm like, why would you have this one region that's 2 unconnected areas? And sure enough, as you play, you get pathways from one to the other. You open up the region, and then by the end, I remember some reviews were like, yeah, each of these places is actually pretty small. And looking back, I'm like, that is so wrong, because these places sprawl out by the end of the game.
Yeah.
Even though you have
especially the Dalmatia region at the south, the desert. Absolutely.
So huge. But even then, like the Rosaria place, when I went back to it, by that point, it was like you could kind of move around pretty well because of your mountain stuff, but at the same time, like maybe it was partly because the fast travel is just so fast in this game, because
the load time's so quick.
PS5, baby. You'll load up and I'll like instinctively reach for my phone because I've just been conditioned like that. It's still going to take you like a minute or so to get where you're going, and by the time I've picked up my phone, you're where you need to be. And like even if you're going from a completely different region into the new one, it maybe takes a couple seconds, and then you're just there.
Yeah, but even think about that, is like the worlds that you explore here. It's not an open world because it also feels very manageable to be moving around these areas, and I actually do like that, because it doesn't. As open worlds keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's weird. You're hearing rain?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like. So suddenly I was getting wet. I was like, what? Yes, but no, nothing's happening.
It's not that hole in your ceiling, is it?
No, because it already got covered. We've been like getting slammed with rains, but anyway, if this feels like manageable worlds to explore, with the option to make them bigger if you're engaged in things like the beast hunt, which are like the only areas in this game that literally don't point you. They just explain. Yeah. Give you an idea.
Sometimes it depends on the day I'm having, on if I really like that or if I don't. Because sometimes I just want to like get there and fight the thing, and then sometimes I'm like, I'm actually really glad I get to look through the map and really learn how things work. I think I would like it more if the looking at the map was easier. Like zooming in.
I slightly agree with that, but I also say that considering this game literally points you everywhere in main quest, like the main quest thing is always in your map. That thing, you can't shut that off. You always know where that thing will be if you're like in the area, or even like a side quest. That I'm glad that there's at least one element that's a little bit more player driven, because if there's something kind of like what I was telling you, that why a game like Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is like so popular, is that it trusts the player into being able to figure things out, and because of the relative compactness of some of these worlds, it's not much of a chore just exploring around. Even though sometimes
at least you know you're looking in a specific region whenever you go into
it. And then eventually you're like, oh wait, there's the specific. Can I walk here? And then suddenly the whole thing opens up. It's like, cool, I found that. And then when I did one of those, that's where I found the freaking level 50 dragon in the Sembrique region. So it's like those are the things that I'm glad are there, because for people that don't like having their hand hold, it's like, at least when it comes to side quests and main quests, that is there. So I'm glad that at least there was some thought put into some of the worlds without ever being an open world, because me having just played the biggest open world game ever with Tears of the Kingdom, it's hard sometimes jumping back to those kinds of games. So I'm glad they were able to do that, especially because this game has a bit of a pacing problem. We kind of like we had already like talked about it. Like the pacing of this game is wonky at best and terrible at worst in some areas, because in large chunks there are times, like we were talking about that in our chats, is like there are times where a huge chunk of the game can sometimes feel like you're making progress at a certain point and feel like you're getting like a nice stopping point, especially early on when you're like getting your early abilities. It's after the Bahamut section, which is insane. Let's just put like that boss battle, which didn't seem that way at first, and just how it evolves.
I think that's another thing I want to mention as well. A lot of games build up to one big segment, but this game, for every, let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
At least 6 separate huge set pieces that could serve as the big climactic conclusion for any other game.
Yeah,
that's I think what I want everybody to understand about this one.
Think about it. 2 hours into the game, you get Phoenix versus Ifrit. That was or the fire icon, how it was called there.
And for everybody wondering, this is where we're going to start getting into some actual spoilers. So just warn yourself now.
Yes, not quite plot yet, but like, for example, it starts with that Phoenix Ifrit thing. Then the next big one, it's like a double punch. Geo against Benedicta, which is the dominant that has Garuda. That's where you get your first power. Yep. And then immediately after, you fight her like dominant, her prime version, which is actual
like the
Garuda.
2-for-1 special for that one.
And then afterwards, it's like you get the climactic moment, which is when you get your limit break, which was like ironically that point, which we're gonna get into like the plot points. It's like it kind of solved what was the initial like push or like motivation for your character at a point. That could have been like a climax also, and it happened there. Then you get the when you fight the Typhon, which is when you get to the big crystal and you fight that Evangelion.
That's another one.
Yeah, the Evangelion style,
that's
like half angel, the main villain of the game, which is Ultima. And then afterwards is like the other double punch, which is Hugo Kupka, which is Titan, which you fight him one-on-one in like your
just a big. Oh my gosh!
Dragon Ball Z fight between these two.
You start off, I think, with like, because it's the one-on-one as a person. You get the second wave, which is the break core, night core, crazy nonsense. Then you get the heavy rock segment, and then you get the final,
which is like the drop, the endless drop between the two. And then obviously the Bahamut, and then after Bahamut, you go into an extended long section.
Desert.
The proverbial desert that is you against Odin, which is Barnabas Thurn. I think it was his last name, which is the pirate. And
easily the least interesting dude. It was like he seemed really cool, and sure enough, he ended up being a wet blanket. But it also treated as like the tone shift that a lot of people talked about. And I don't know if it was as much of that. I think it was really in the mechanics that was the failure in that segment, because by itself it felt the same in tone. And it very much marked a change for the main character to realize he couldn't just rely on his big Super Saiyan power-up to solve this problem, because Homeboy could kick him out of it at will. So it was a real moment of, all right, what are you actually made of? You can't just press the win button anymore. So I loved that part of it, and I loved every part. Like, I didn't even mind that you have to fight him several times, and he beats you. Yeah,
he beats you twice. And my thing is that the place where he beats you the second time was such a visually stunning place. In that area, that the place where you fight him in the end is like, it's technically cool and dark and kind of eerie, but it's just not as visually stimulating as.
You know what I'm just thinking about is how much work somebody put in that area, only for me to now realize that you only see it for really half of a boss fight, and then you never see it again. They had to render the water, they had to render that whole area. You can't even visit it to like run around. You're not like, there's not a gameplay segment after that fight segment. It's just that, and then you're gone, and it's a completely different scene after that.
For a game that ostensibly took 7 years to make, can you imagine this section was like probably someone's entire work for an entire year? Because if you want the definition of a game that you see the money and every cent spent on the screen, this is that game. Because there's when it comes to like the macro, it's like there's no expense that was like shortchanged in this, other than some side quests and some animation work there. But in the macro, it's like they really put so much money in this, and even in areas that are such tiny moments, it's like they still like Final Fantasy 15 suffers from this. You clearly saw the places where things got cut because obviously that game was a 10-year development nightmare, and some of the places you're like, wow, I'm glad that they were able to keep this. This felt like this definitely feels the complete opposite to 15 in that everything that they attempted to do, it feels like it made it into the game. You never feel you never feel anything was shortchanged for the things that they decided to focus on, and it's in that focus of just being like a story heavy character based action game that this game is really strong, even though the sacrifices to Final Fantasy's complexity to get to this point was can hurt for longtime fans. But even then, it's like that whole Odin section. As soon as I finally beat that guy, and like you're finally getting into like the quote unquote end game section of the game, is like how it starts picking back up again. And I'm glad that they saved, in my opinion, they saved the best for last. Like in like spectacle and like in impact, in a way that I thought we had already peaked. That was when Bahamut happened. I was fearful that it was like, man, they gave us already the best thing, and now it's just downhill from there. Especially because of hearing some people like complaining about the ending, and now realizing that the thing that people were complaining more about the ending was more the things that it didn't do than what it actually was. Because I thought this was a great ending. Like it really, I thought it really, like it really, at least in the things that I cared about, which was the characters and all of that, is like it hit everything that it needed to hit. But before we, and spectacle, and just before we dive into the plot of things, Paul, what are your thoughts on the whole side quests of it all? Because I feel that's the most polarizing part of the package.
I'll talk on that as well, and I do want us to also talk a little bit more unmitigated about the combat after that, because I think that was kind of the through line of like briefly mentioning little bits and pieces, but I do want to touch on that anyway. So the side quests themselves, like you mentioned, we were all talking about it, I think 2 weeks ago now.
When we started playing
it was like, this is terrible. You have to bring food to people and
go fetch some wood, go grab some dirt. Yeah.
But now it's definitely a grab bag. There is a little bit of like really good character work, a lot of context, a lot of amazing stuff going on behind the scenes, even in like the delivery of each line. The voice actors clearly did not take any off days on even the simplest of side quests. They bring their A game every point. Even if the animations don't line up, even if the lip flaps don't match at all. And I was noticing that there's a surprisingly large amount of areas where the lips don't match what people are saying. In the really, really nice ones, they're clearly English, and that was like very formed. But even like that midway cutscenes, I don't think that they really matched them very closely.
Yeah, it felt like a Japanese dub that then gets the English dub on top of that. Even though, ironically, I heard that this was the first time that in a Square Enix game that they did English first. Yeah, because they wanted to capture that, and it makes sense because their big inspiration that they copied so many things wholesale from was Game of Thrones. It's not a Game of Thrones game when you see like everything is like.
I think that's where I was coming from the last week and the week before, where everybody who was comparing it to Game of Thrones was underselling it.
Yeah.
Because it set people up for failure to think it was something that it wasn't.
Yeah.
It took some of the aesthetic, and it took some of the rhythm and the tone, and that was it. It was not Game of Thrones, and I think that is for its benefit. I think it's just the people that thought it was that got disappointed from it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And because it's a Final Fantasy ass game. It absolutely is. It's like a world-ending threat. The themes of fate, defying fate and gods, and all of that. The heart and sleeve emotion between like your main character and pseudo love interest, or the friendships that they bond with like throughout the stories. Like it's crazy how much they were able to get so many tried and true Final Fantasy tropes in, even when the tone like this is like the. In the mainline series, this is the darkest Final Fantasy. It's the first M-rated Final Fantasy outside your favorite, Stranger of Paradise, which wasn't a mainline Final Fantasy game. It's a side.
It's funny. It's dark by virtue of modernity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because there's like the previous games, 6 especially, that one famously ends with you failing and the world gets pretty much ruined and
Yeah.
destroyed completely. So it's like if somebody remade 6, that would probably go back to being the darkest, but for like sheer content
Yeah, I
wise,
thought
definitely.
I thought 4 was also one of that people say is also pretty dark, but you didn't feel
4
it
is pretty
because
dark. I think
yeah.
6 ekes it out just by virtue of them basically having Final Fantasy Joker
Uh-huh.
as the main villain.
Kafka. Yeah.
Yeah, but 4 is pretty close there, and I really would love to revisit. Um, I would really love to revisit 4 as well because I
But
remember it came out on
they
PSP. I
Pixel
mean, yeah, the Pixel
remasters.
remaster. We'll see. I want
we
like a little bit more than the Pixel remasters. However, so that's all of them.
all of them.
1
1
to
through
6.
6, yeah. We could,
Maybe we could chat about that.
yeah, it's $75. So like the split would be it would help, it would make it worth it getting all of them. But yes, but because I definitely a lot of people mention a lot of 4 and 6 in comparison and how much 16 actually like pays homage a lot to old Final Fantasies that I'm like because I just know I never played those original ones. Like I start from 7 onward for me. So that's why I would like to go that like I would like to go back and
I think
get into
4 would
that.
probably be one that you'd really like because I got to actually like put a good both feet in for a little while before I stopped playing my PSP. And like they said, especially the limit break moment, there's like very similar vibes to that idea of like you are a white knight paladin, but you've also got to take on some darkness to save the world kind of thing. And like your armor shifts, it's really cool anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, back to
Back to the side
quest.
quest. Yeah, back to the side quest. To me, like how I saw it is that it makes such a horrible first impression that I'm not surprised if people do the first ones and then they just straight up ignore every side quest from here from that point onward because it's very it almost becomes Russian roulette because for every few that I like suck or I was like, oh, what was the point of this? I mean, it's like you get a little story but it doesn't feel substantial. Then
usually they're at least quick.
Yeah, they're quick, but then that's the point. It's like, yeah, it's quick, but it's like nothing really substantial, no big rewards at early on. So it's like this feels like they're padding until suddenly when you reach the Northreach area, you're hit like a truck with with like 2 or 3 of those that start delving into like the slight themes of like the caste system that creates like inequality between the normal human beings and the bearers, which is the people that have access to like magic and things like that, and how they're treated like slaves. I'll say this: after all the brouhaha of many, including the stupid Eurogamer review that went on a whole spiel about how there were like no black people in this game and all that, I'm like, considering they were doing slavery, can you imagine if they had actually done black people and done slavery there, and how that would have been seen, and like what the discourse would have been?
That it would have been real messy, I tell you that.
Yeah.
I'm usually of the mind of let people of color be in everything, no matter what it is, because just from a character design perspective, it gives you so much more variety. But then on top of it, then real people of those races can then play characters easier. It's a whole different thing. But on top of all of that, I can also see why they decided to step back and go, no, we're just gonna stick to everybody's the same race here, because if we add that on top of the fact that we're already treating people as second-class citizens and not real people and stuff, it's gonna get real messy. As then you get into like BioShock Infinite, and it takes because then it's like, okay, we're gonna just skirt past that and move back onto the rest of it. We're not gonna think about that side of it.
Yeah, even though it's a through line that, at least in main plot, it's not like it's not further explored as things becomes a little bit more grander, but still keeping the spirit of why you're doing things are specifically for those reasons. I thought that even them not showing like these people of color in those places, how they how they portray like how some of these humans were treating these bearers. One with throwing it to a wolf to be devoured just for like sport, with a kid that almost feels like it was inspired by Joffrey from Game of Thrones, how he was like treating those bears, and then the other girl that's looking for her pet and realized what her pet was. Those were like next to each other. It's like there is no signal at all that tells you that those two side quests are gonna hit you like unlike the other ones. And that's kind of why I see that it's like Russian roulette early on, because it's like you don't expect that that's how it's gonna hit, and then when they hit you, it's like, wait. It's like, this was actually really good. Holy crap. It's like, this made me feel like, I was even mentioning, it's like, if this wasn't Bethesda style RPG and that happened, this would have been the point I would have like forgone my good morality and would have ended those people there at the point, because they were so hateful and they were treating you like such a piece of crap, because you were also branded, and like the people that are like in that point in the story, we're gonna get fuller there in the plot of like whoever's branded and has the powers, like they tattoo that to the face of someone. So, and your main character eventually gets like branded like that, and then like that's how people treat you when you're in that kingdom. So it's like, it really makes you feel. And I'm like, man, imagine if this was like how it was like if they actually put people of color in that thing, like especially for a Japanese, this being a Japanese studio that made this, like where, remember, like the way they see social issues and things is completely different to how things in America, the current version of America, where we currently are, like that, where all of that is like so feels like dominates all sorts of conversation. I feel they dodged a bullet while still making the point. So
yeah, especially because even now, especially like a lot of anime will still use black caricature styling in 2023, which if for some reason they don't seem to learn that lesson every once in a while.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it's gotten a lot better, but it still exists.
But again, it's like different cultures. Like we can't expect, like the world is so huge, cultures and expressions are different in each different country. We can't expect like what America values to be the thing that everyone values the same way. And
yeah,
I'm glad that they sidestep while still make the point. And as for the side quest, I feel from the final time jump onward, side quests from a story perspective, at least the ones that are not the plus sign, which is like the plus sign starts after the final time jump. That's when you start getting the clearly marked side quests that are with the plus sign, that when you complete them, not only sometimes they're important in story, they actually give you game enhancing rewards that the other ones don't, or that they wait too late to eventually give you. Like, for example, like the side quest that you get near the end of that game, which is like the goodbye side quest that we went on the whole thing, because I wanted you to get into that ending, but I didn't want you to get into that ending without getting some of those goodbyes ends, especially the ones where the ending actually mattered. That is like,
I'm really glad I was able to go through those, and I actually agree with you, because I think that those should have been like a midway point. I think, because especially the fact that it gives you the gameplay benefit of letting you carry that character alongside you for the whole rest of the game.
Exactly, right? It's like
such a very useful ability for them to be like, oh yeah, you're about to finish at the final boss. Now you can permanently unlock your party member.
Yeah.
That just sounds ridiculous to me personally.
Because apparently, like, when that happens, if you still go do other side quests that you still have unlocked, well, now they're like permanent members of your party, because your permanent member is Torgal, the best dog ever. Which is like the absolute best boy. It's like the characters apparently now comment more about the things that are happening in the world, like as you're doing the side quests, which before
I've
even
seen
though
gameplay, they'll comment on like regularly, like the dialogue in the side quests. There's whole dialogue things that like they'll interject and comment on things going on. It's like so many people are going to miss that, because they're going to do all the side quests before the final boss, obviously. So it almost seems really backwards, and I wish there was some way that you could do that goodbye.
Yeah.
And it's not even like a goodbye. Like, you could phrase it as there is just, this is like
the unfinished business you need with those characters, basically.
Yeah, I mean, like, even something like Persona, you can max out their social link earlier on in the game, and then you just have them with you at that level. Just let that play out. Just do enough things, and then eventually you get this ability to have this one really special side quest where then they are permanently with you after that. Because then it's like the combat completely changes, and like, well, I'm thinking about it, just how wild, especially by the end when you have somebody like Jill, or, as spoilers we've already established, for Joshua. Being alongside you, the combos are ridiculous that you can
but you can't control them. That's the thing. Like, the only character that you can control, at least like from being able to handle party, is Torgal. like if through the D-pad. Like D-pad up, you psych them in into like for an attack, or D-pad down, you can have Torgal like lift an enemy for you to continue a combo. And I was just thinking, like the system was there in place, and D-pad left completely changes things, kind of like how you change things with L2, which is how you switch between your icon abilities. I'm like, imagine if they had allowed a way for you to like sick a companion into the middle of your combo. Can you imagine? It's like you're starting the combo, pressing like.
I was really wishing that if you could have switched Torgal out for another character that basically does the same mechanically thing.
Yeah.
Same thing mechanically.
Or not switch Torgal at all and just add that.
Yeah,
but
even better.
Yeah, and I see that why they didn't do that is because they want the focus. Because when you had a big party system in the other Final Fantasy games, what that meant is that you're always in control of like, how are they doing with health? Are they have to do the specific attack? I was like, oh, they're down, so trying to bring a Phoenix down to bring them up. And it's like when you're trying to, when the focus of this, especially with Ryota Suzuki, the combat director of DMC5 and Dragon's Dogma, doing the combat of this game. And what you're doing at DMC, and it's like you're focusing on yourself. You're focusing on the combos you're doing, your spatial awareness, the mechanics that you're gonna start chaining. That the idea of having to then like manage the party feels like counter to that idea. But then I see with Torgal, which is like he never goes down, like he doesn't have a health, but you can still like use him to heal you or attack him in two different ways. I feel there could have been a perfect middle to still have a way for your other companions that are very self-sufficient and attack things at their own volition to be able to do that, especially when you see like a big move like Jill's, that she brings like the whole Shiva like big eyes to the sky, then like drops it like randomly, or even Joshua's like big laser attack, or even some of Sid's RIP like doing some of his Ramu things. Is like I feel like
that brings up something else that I was just thinking, but I'll let you finish the thought.
That I feel like here's the thing, like if you go back to original release of Final Fantasy 15, your interactions with your crew were like very limited, and then them working with the Royal Edition and doing the expansions and all that, they made the on top of you being able to control the characters. Like you can actually now control, like in Final Fantasy 15 you can control Prompto, Gladiolus, and Ignis like as actual characters if you unlock like a specific upgrade in an upgrade tree to be able to do a little bit more. I would hope that they do a little, they are able to like expand this game and maybe like add extra things to that thing. Because
something that I read that they said they don't have any. Okay, so there's no intention of DLC yet, but that's also like this is very early in release, so that could always.
It was more like this wasn't made with the intention to expand, but they wanted to release this. This was Naoki Yoshida, the big executive producer of this game, the one that was in charge of saving and maintaining Final Fantasy XIV. That they wanted to see feedback. They wanted to see like have like a complete experience out of the gate, and hear how people are feeling about it before they start expanding. Because with Final Fantasy 15, that was made with the intention that they were gonna expand it immediately,
right? Because they weren't done.
Exactly, they were not done, and those plans of expansion were to try to fill up a lot of the plot holes and gaps of that story. And then at a certain point, they had plans for more DLC, but because they saw that the engagement of that game had been like going down, all of that, they decided to cancel the final plans and ended with the episode Arden. And and whatever
there was going to be a Luna Freya.
There was going to be a Luna Freya. There was going to be like that soldier that joins you for one section. It has like this cool chick with like the cool armor. She was gonna have
the Dragoon lady.
The Dragoon lady. And then there was going to be an episode Noctis, which was going to be like an alternate version of the ending. That I was reading about this when I finished 15, because I was like, whatever happened to that planned DLC? Apparently they did a book. They put the story that was planned into like book form, and the final DLC was gonna be about you against Bahamut, in that version of Bahamut, obviously, because every Final Fantasy has like a different version, but it had all the different summons in equal times. But I'm hoping that right now there's like this game sold a lot in its first week. Right now there's like this Bloomberg journalist, Takashi Mochizuki, the one that has been like reporting erroneously many things over at Bloomberg, and he's been going in this tirade that Final Fantasy XVI is not like a success, even though it sold 3 million copies in one console that doesn't have even remotely the install base of the other consoles when Final Fantasy 15 came out, and that was multi-platform. It's like a lot of he's just being very obtuse. Also because like the sales for in week 2 in Japan like tumbled. Even though if you look at other Final Fantasies, they also tumbled in the week 2. So it's like this game is successful, like in all relative terms, and that's what Square Enix has been waiting, and they want to see like the reaction. I hope the reaction they're seeing is good enough that they're able to expand. Like I mean, we got a patch yesterday before we recorded that added the thing that people have been asking, kind of like the please give us motion blur like controller, being able to shut off. Now you can do that. Please add more. People were asking, please give us like full customization controls, but they added a few more presets, and now they added the one that people have been wanting, which was they wanted dodge to be circle, and they wanted the icon attacks to be R1, because the rest of the controls were just perfect for like what the kind of game it is. I tried it yesterday. Too late for me. It's like I'm already used to the dodge in R1, but I'm glad for people that were still like holding on to that. Now they have that option, so they're still like, even though they're saying like game's complete, they're still adding. So I'm hoping they add more, because this is a really good one, and I would love to see if they could like expand the story in some ways, especially because there's a lot of things that's left open to like interpretation that we have to talk about it.
There's an entire theory growing around Leviathan the Lost, if you
remember. Oh yeah,
his mention, and the fact that he's got a giant crystal that's collapsed in the ocean off the
of some breeze. You can see it, yeah.
And so there's a lot of stuff that's mentioned. Like clearly they put so much effort into this world building that I am relishing just any ability for us to just find out more about it.
Yeah, if there was like a sub franchise that deserves the -2 or a -3, it would be this one. I would love to. They expanded Final Fantasy 13, even though fans were not asking for it, because people were like. Even though right now there's some revisionist history happening with 13 currently, because to be fair to 13, a lot of the things that people really love about 16 were also done in 13. So it's like that was ahead of its time actually. So they hated you at first, and now or what's the Thanos meme?
You could not. With your failure.
No. Not only that. The other one was like, perhaps I treated you too harshly.
Oh, that's absolutely correct, especially in this climate. There was one thing that I wanted to mention before we lost track of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the idea that I think a couple of weeks ago I mentioned that I didn't like that Torgal was tied to the launch mechanic, which of course you do end up getting some skills that let you do that, but that he is just your default launch. I didn't like all that much, and sure enough, it came full circle, because the entire last portion of the game, you don't have Torgal with you, and so you don't have that ability anymore that you've been really relying on.
Yeah, but to be fair, you fight a boss that you can't send up, so you don't really need
it. It's more the idea in like DMC is there's a button that lets you do the launch by itself, but then there's another one where if you hold it, it throws you into the air as well. So it's just an easy way for you to jump up by doing damage, evading. It's not like you have to hit and then jump separately. You move with the enemy normally. Yeah. So the only is like your best method of doing
the only way to do that without Torgal is you hold the square button to ignite your sword, jump, release, and then you do like an attack that jumps you up. It's like the only way,
which is like that's the other way to do it, but of course it takes a little bit longer. So it's like there are ways around it, but in my head, because that was like my go-to move back in Devil May Cry. So
because you like doing your combos, you like doing your combos in the air, right?
I love doing my combos in the air.
So it's like
absolutely the way I do it.
Yeah, and there's other ways to do that here, like also the Garuda second attack that sends you up. It's also another one. It's a good one for stagger. And before we go into plot, we have to talk about the mechanics of this, like being like done by the DMC guy. And I tell you, it's like once a lot of things unlocked, and it keeps unlocking. This is definitely a combat that just keeps getting better and better and better as you go along. I still say that it is to the game's disservice for people that played the Icon Challenge back in the demo to get a taste of having 3 sets of Icon abilities unlocked and seeing how that work together. And for so long in the game, you only have like 1, and then you only have 2. until you get a third one, which is when the game really starts. If we're pretty honest about like where the rest of that story takes you, but that was like the point, because I was like, I hate that I played the Icon Challenge, but I needed to play because I really wanted to see what the combat was outside of like those 2 hours, because the thing that I was sold in the demo was the story and the thing that ended that demo. But the combat was like, yes, like very they said this is like DMC, and I see that there's an upgrade for me to get the launch, and yes, I could do like a dodge and counter attack and all that, but it feels fairly limited. It doesn't feel like the combo based game that I was expecting. But then it's clear that the way you do combos in this game are on top of your attacks. It's like it's all about how you make a successive connection of the different icons, and when all of that is in sync, so damn satisfying, so freaking satisfying. Like being able to like combine my Shiva AoE attack, alt attack to like really bring down the stagger meter as fast as I could, then immediately do Ramu's like slam down like for like a big quick AoE electricity on top of then using Bahamut's like lasers that then keep like hitting an enemy no matter what, so it keeps like chipping away at the stagger, and then just that combo of like doing my Titan punch, my Ifrit like shoulder charge, and then late in the game my Virgil katana like finisher, which I always timed it. Okay, it has few health. Okay, charge the thing, close, slashes, boom, fight over. It always felt so nice. It's like so.
I love the fact that each of them does a very, very different thing. They're very clearly built for certain abilities. One's more AoE, one's more big slams, but also the fact that like I loved my Titan. I actually didn't even mention it much in our chat, but the ability for you to parry almost anything.
Yeah.
There's a couple of examples where it's clearly like, no, you weren't meant to parry this because it'll keep doing more damage while you're in the animation of parrying, and then you could potentially die like that.
Yeah. Do you ever do the one, because of the Titans, it's like the two ones in your circle, and there's the one in the middle before the alt one, the one that was in the middle, that it's also a parry, and if it's not a parry, it's the one that you do the quick punches. But if you like time it right, man, the satisfaction of like that power parry of that one, it's so good.
I didn't end up touching that because I was mainstreaming so much that I had to be really selective on what I upgraded, because I had a plan by the end of it. So I ended up with my Phoenix, I ended up with my Bahamut, and I ended up with my Titan.
Yeah,
you switching out most of the Titan stuff for.
Yeah, you went heavy on the ults. From what I saw, it's like you had like the fire. I saw the video. You had like the fire one that lives a fire and has like some snake happening. You had the big laser from Bahamut, and do you have a third one of those ults, or you're?
I had the Ramu javelin throw.
Okay, yeah, that the thrust itself.
I would have one quick cooldown move for each ones that I could switch between to slowly stagger him down. And the second I saw that stagger move go, where it zooms in really quick, limit break, and then just throw everything at it, and I would usually get like half of that health of the enemy. Like in story things, it would immediately put me into the next phase. I would just survive long enough to get that stagger meter down, and it was like over every time.
Yeah, and to me, like I wanted most of my damages to always be the icon ability, so that's why like I only committed to two of the alt attacks. It was Shiva's, because I needed Jill representation in my repertoire, and that was and that was like actually so good. Like how much like it deletes the stagger meter in so many bosses. And then the ult for Odin is the one where he charges the swords, and then you go into like a slow-mo attack where you just keep slashing and builds up the meter. Because the thing with the Odin set is that all of his attacks are weak AF. They're so weak, but it's because you're building that meter. And then when the meter hits 4, or if you upgrade it to mastery, it's 5. That's when you then hold the square button and release, and that's when you do the Virgil katana move that deletes everything. So, but as I was building on that, I needed all the other attacks to be like, okay, here's the punch, here's my shoulder charge, my Ramu thing is like both attacks and staggers, and then I need the that Bahamut kind of like just stagger over time thing, so I can be like from behind and just keep shooting while that thing keeps like delaying, and then suddenly boom, it staggers it. So, and you just I think you just underlined where the build diversity of this game comes from. They like
the fact that there's no one like this is the best DPS or whatever. You and I don't even think there's any overlap on which ones we're using, because I didn't touch Shiva. I tried using Odin and I was like, I need to build for this, so I'm not going to touch it right now, especially this late in the game. And then you did what was your third?
Yeah, so like mine was I had the Phoenix / Ifrit, I had Shiva, I had Garuda.
So
I
had
only
the same Phoenix, but we used very different ones. Abilities.
Yeah. Yes, and Garuda, I only had the grab because that grab is like it became so intrinsic to my playstyle that I was like, I'm gonna change the other abilities, but I'm keeping the circle for Garuda. Then Ramu, I had Bahamut. I basically had all of them. Like almost all of them were represented in some way, shape, or form. So when I really think about it,
was when you just break down, especially like those big moments. You see videos online of how crazy all of this stuff is, and then when you're really struggling with yourself and then you finally upgrade a little bit, because some of those upgrades make those moves really powerful. Like my Ramu one, as soon as I upgraded it to the fact that I could throw the javelin twice, it just doubled my damage. It was insane. But like, yeah, just the fact that you can build any of these. If you like the vibe of one of them, there's something that you're going to find that's really good out of it. And the fact that I can use the Titan to parry just about anything. The Garuda thing lets you dodge just about anything. The Shiva being basically the trickster mode from DMC. I was like, I can't believe they added that crazy dodge mechanic in this game.
And in this one, adds the freezing. Like you dodge and then press circle again to attack that freezing thing.
And the AoE move, not even the ultimate one, but there's one that pulls a bunch of enemies into you. When I found that out, I was like, I am honestly kind of sad that I have like my favorite set to follow, because I think like when I replay the game, I want to do something with Shiva and Odin because of how crazy all the stuff continues to be.
By the way, it's insane, the enemies that they throw at you at the beginning. Like, I had to fight a Minotaur, like in that initial forest area when you're with Sid, and like immediately already at level 45 Minotaur, and I ended the game at level 49, so I was just short of level 50 for my completion rate. And
I don't know what level I was actually.
Yeah, you should check. And I'm like, and if so far as like it feels like it's not super challenging, the Final Fantasy mode, which by the way is the quote unquote hard mode that unlocks after you're done with the first run, and it's only playable in the New Game Plus, so everything carries with you. So it's very cool using those early abilities in that early in the story. And I'm actually curious to try other stuff, and I think that's kind of where the replay value of this thing will be, where it'll be like you have all these different abilities, see if you can change things around and see and make the
fact
game
that you'll now be able to go back to any of those segments gameplay wise to redo all of those boss fights, whatever you want through that. The fact that I only found one of these, but there is those little like tombstone things.
Yes, that unlocks
trials.
God damn it! I've never been in one of them. I haven't been able to beat one. They're hard.
I got halfway through the first one that I found, which was all Phoenix stuff, and I was just like,
that was the one. Yeah, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Yeah, actually, the first one that I found was a Garuda one. I couldn't do it. Okay. Then I found I only get to phase 2, and in one time I ran out of time, and the other one I got killed. So it's like I want to, and the thing is that to platinum this game, you have to do all of them. So I'm like, okay, like I actually like this game enough that I'm kind of I'm already see that I'm already more than halfway through a trophy. So we'll see. It's like right now that I'm in this calm period now that I'm not reviewing anything, nothing of note is released, or at least the things that we have to jump in immediately unless we hear it otherwise. But it's like it feels like now we have time to breathe to like play for fun and not for
finally.
not for a job. And in this one, I feel like you had to beat it because you didn't want to get it spoiled. So that's kind of like the thing with this kind of story games. You want to get them done because you fear that. And I'm thankful it wasn't spoiled at all in story. So
I don't think I was either, and I'm actually kind of shocked by that. There was like theories going around, but it was never like this is the actual ending of the game because, of course, after finishing it, I realized, oh, that theory had a few holes in it. That was clearly not the real ending. But some of it, it's like it's predictable enough on purpose that you can like kind of infer some of it. Like obviously spoilers as we've already said, but like the fact that Joshua was going to kick the bucket by the end, I knew that was coming from the beginning because his whole thing was boosting up Ifrit in their power, so he would have to die to give his power, and like that was already a foregone conclusion. Just how it happened, I wasn't expecting.
And somehow it still hit me. Even like as predictable as that, end up being like looking back to it, but it's just like somehow those emotional beats still land. But I want to save that for plot. Just final thing, like for the gameplay, like I really love the combat. I feel like the quote-unquote RPG mechanics that they added for this, which is like the crafting and the weapon that you can change and the two defensive gear pieces and the 3 trinkets, they feel so the most bare minimum like level of customization that I feel was just left there just because it was a Final Fantasy tradition more than it enhancing or the game. I'm feel
glad
that
the swords were changed because they had a lot of variety in those, but you're right with the belt loop and the bracelet, it didn't even change anything. I got what I wanted out of it in like the first 10 hours and stayed with those the entire rest
basically
of the
the loop is as in between major segments, just go to the blacksmith and go to Karen, buy the things that are clearly giving you stats that the numbers say are higher than what the other one, and it just feels more psychological than like deeply gameplay enhancement. I felt it more after playing Diablo, which was like in Diablo, like you felt like pieces of gear. In that one, you actually feel like a significant increase in like your abilities and your either weapon or ability usage in that game, but also because it was that kind of game. But this one, like being so bare minimum, I feel like unfortunately if they had not included this at all, then a lot of people would be like, this is not Final Fantasy at all. But then they include it and realize like it's not deep enough. So it's like I'm hoping that in the things that they really nailed, which was like nailing this combat system, they want to keep in this direction. I still feel like for the Final Fantasy franchise, the ideal gameplay should be what they did with 7 Remake. Action game with like the slow-mo limit breaks and the ability pickers, that also makes it strategic because it keeps the spirit of what the series was while still being appealing for modern audiences that need something more active.
I think there's still a method that you could even bridge that gap between 7 Remake having the party management but still having some kind of a combo system, because like for Cloud, for instance, it is a little bare bones for him. You're kind of switching between your 2 modes. You got your dodge, it's like kind of a built-in parry, but it's really all about switching between characters doing the crazy moves while each of the ATB pages grows up. So if you had something like Cloud has some kind of extra ability to like do some real combos out of that, then you could add the team control on top of that.
Yeah, and also I emphasize that because a lot of what people love about like systemic Final Fantasy stuff, like gear and customization and all that, was in 7 Remake. Like those things were there that were not here. I would love to see them like keep building on this one because they did. So to me, it's like this combat is like as close to good as a DMC as it can get, superior in some ways. Even though there's, and also it helps because this is not also as technically demanding as a DMC game, so it's also that to that benefit. They were able to do that kind of game in a way that people that are not versed in the nigh perfection sometimes a DMC game requires from you.
Oh, it does.
And if I feel Final Fantasy 16 managed to hit that early on to the point that right now there's like people decrying that they didn't have their hard mode immediately, and I'm like, I get it. I feel like personally, if I'm honest, they should have had Final Fantasy mode unlocked for the people there. Like,
I think it's tricky because for a game that relies so much on the story, to allow people to make it so hard that some people are going to have too much pride to lower the difficulty once they've done that, and then they'll never finish the story, because that's absolutely what happens to a lot of people. And I think they really wanted people to experience the story once before really ramping it up. And truthfully, that's exactly what you do in Devil May Cry. The problem is Devil May Cry is an 8-hour game.
Yeah,
And
that's
this
the
is
difference.
about
This is
80 hours.
exactly. Well, if shorter if you're just mainlining, but the best experience possible is experience all of it.
I think the best way, actually, maybe to circumvent all of this is actually another thing from Devil May Cry. If you're really struggling, they'll unlock the easy mode for you. But vice versa.
The assist mode. The assist mode, right? The assist mode, right? I was like,
no, there's one called like Human or something, because they always name them weird things. But yeah, there was like an assist on top of that was later on added, especially like to the Devil May Cry 3 remastered, I think.
And this was also something the old action, like character action God of War games did. If you were dying a lot, eventually you get a menu be like, you're getting your ass kicked. You want to lower the difficulty? Like, kind of like asking you is like, yeah, or even Resident Evil does that. Like, there's some, if you're playing, it's like, I think it wouldn't have hurt it. It's
actually,
it's also
Metal Gear Solid 5 did too with the chicken hat.
Yeah, the chicken hat. Yeah, so it's like that option is there. So it's like the hard mode is there. I get it. It's like, to me, it wouldn't have hurt for that mode to be it for the ones that really want it. I just make it clear, hey, this is really hard. It's like, give me God of War difficulty, and God of War is unlocked from the start, and it warns you, be like, you can't lower it afterwards. It's really hard. Do you really want to do it?
Yeah.
Before like allowing you. So I feel like just give you the option, especially since it eventually unlocks. I'm playing through Final Fantasy mode now, and I'm really excited to see more, because the mix and matching of the enemies that are showing up early is like, they were not kidding. How it's like those late game enemies show up so early that I'm like, now it feels like I'm playing a different game now, and I'm doing more strategy early on than I did. I
appreciate that though, because it wasn't until the later portion that I was really enjoying the process of the fighting, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I was enjoying myself, but I feel like it really hit its stride when you had enemies chunky enough to actually survive it, for you to just blow them away.
Exactly, and that's where the Final Fantasy mode like is like hitting all the right spots, and I can't wait to play more of it. So now I think we have danced around this thing, Paul. Now we have to talk about the most important thing, which is the plot. And just in kind of like the most summarized way possible, Paul, like, what is the story about? Like,
so Clive, being the wonderful child he is born in a terrible place called medieval Europe.
Yeah.
But okay, to actually summarize all of it, it's the idea of this guy going from a very young age to in his like mid-30s, I think, showing how one dude can go from being the absolute modern underdog into just the best.
Because I restarted the game and I actually played through the early sections again. Like, when you first play as John Clive, he's 15.
Yeah.
Then when we see him like early adult, he's 28, and then ends the game at 33.
33.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, we do eventually get some flashbacks to him even younger than the 15, but you only play as him at 15. So yeah, the idea that Clive is going to work his way through saving the world in every way, basically. In every way you can imagine a Final Fantasy hero is going to basically do. And on the way, we get to drop into the Game of Thrones universe like a Kingdom Hearts character. Drop in and just like, because Clive is not clearly from that whole vibe. He's just, we're going to be nice to people, and we're going to help people. We're going to fight monsters. We're going to be great. And he's in a different genre, poor guy. But as he grows and just gets beefier and beefier with his character design, slowly pulling together a cast of really wild characters, with the end being, I am going to punch God until he says he's sorry for making us.
Yeah.
And
which is literally lifted from Asura's Wrath. I read about that's how Asura's Wrath ends.
I have watched the gameplay of Asura's Wrath. Oh my gosh, I can't say it. With a little bit of Metal Gear Rise Revengeance thrown in there, especially with the Odin fight.
Yeah.
But man, like, I tell you, if you've ever watched a really hype anime fight, if you've ever played a really hype gameplay moment, this is that game.
Yeah.
made in your head when you were an edgy 14-year-old,
Yeah.
really wanting to just do the craziest nonsense and having none of the resources to do it.
Hmm.
Like all of the I love the designs for this game because it's somehow both grounded and Final Fantasy as heck.
Hmm. In a way that
Everything
works.
looks like, yeah, everything looks like it's realistic to the time period, but also like we're not going to follow historical
Hmm.
accuracy, but like everything that is made, all like the armor is made out of is real. In a lot of places, it's lifted straight out of like real armors and real weaponry, but then just like taken a step apart from all of that. And we get to watch just this absolute crappy world fall to pieces as this one guy gets more and more wholesome the older he gets. And eventually you just get to see the best of humanity face off against a really cartoonishly evil villain.
Hmm.
But in the end, that's kind of what you want anyway.
Yeah.
And the fact that it ends with just a perfect, like, I'm going to use your abilities against you better, and just get this amazing moment where you use all of the powers that you've
Hmm.
gained thus far.
All back to
Getting,
back, while the enemy is like screaming the ability he's about to use all the time.
yeah, it
Oh
just
man.
like you're shouting at the enemy's shouting at you. It's just amazing. It's a great time. Mash the square button,
Mm.
punch God in the face, get 999,000
Uh-huh.
damage on him. It's so good. But then you are also left with this extremely grounded story of relationships where you have this guy who has been basically rejected by everybody in his life that he ever cared about, or they died,
Hmm.
and then slowly creating his own found family out of that, doing a better job at found family than even Avengers.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that people love about found families is that they're friends. They know each other's names, Kevin Feige.
Hmm.
Anyway, so yeah, it's just this idea that you get this really grounded and human storyline with that. And while everybody was hyping up the, oh, it's like Game of Thrones, oh, everybody's gonna die, blah, blah, blah. No, it's like you get some raw friendship in there, I'm telling you.
Hmm.
And it
Yeah.
pure power of friendship that keeps everybody alive by the end of this. And that is just, I'm glad that they're holding to that because
Hmm.
sometimes we really need those moments.
Hmm.
And the fact that every character I can remember very clearly, like what their names were, is a
Hmm.
testament to this because there are a lot of games now that I don't remember people's names at all
Yeah.
because they're not worth learning. I
Hmm.
mean, I loved Ghost of Tsushima and I couldn't tell you any characters' names besides Jin.
Yeah. I loved Horizon, and I can tell you any name other than Aloy and Varl because he died, and the chick that was that was Carrie Ann
See, there it
Moss.
is.
Silence with
Yeah.
rest in peace. So it was like it happens, and then like when a game like develops a character, the character so well and connects with them so well, like they stick in your mind. Like
Yeah.
this game is like that does that tenfold. But I feel like the thing that I enjoy most about Clive is just like seeing the entire journey. Like this was a guy that the first son of the Archduke of Rosaria, one of the five kingdoms that are at war in this continent, that thoroughly rejected by his mom because he was not born to be a dominant, which is like in this game's nomenclature. Being a dominant is that you were chosen by the gods to be like the representative of the gods that carry the summons within them, and they become the summons with that. And on that rejection, like he was trying to make up for that rejection by being the shield to his little brother, which was Joshua, which we talked earlier, who actually, when he was born, he actually was the dominant for the Phoenix. And how that story goes when the war is just like about to start again, how like tragedy kind of like makes him lose his family, and on top of like him initially feeling like he was completely incapable of saving his brother from being quote unquote brutally murdered from a second icon of fire, which by the way, people, this was the moment in the demo that whenever you see who we learn is Ifrit, the version of Ifrit in this game, just like after an amazing boss battle where you control the Phoenix, as you're going through the undergrounds and fighting each other, and the music from Soken, just like the choir's like screaming, and like the hype of all that moment, and you playing as the Phoenix and defeating that thing only to see that you didn't defeat it, and then you're just hopeless as you see Ifrit completely tear the wings apart from the Phoenix, and then just lifting it and do the Mortal Kombat punch to the heart thing, as Clive is just like, what you feel is kind of like you're looking at that happening, and he's just like screaming in his lungs and be like, stop Josh, and seeing like how that how much part of his personality is his love for his brother, and how that haunts him, like that moment haunts him for like 13 years of his life, when then after that moment, like he realized that he was betrayed by his mom. His mom completely sold her husband out to the Empire, and she, even though she wanted him dead, then she remembered that her husband, who we see him be beheaded, which is the Game of Thrones, of course, like a king being beheaded, and like that happens very early, and that's why it makes Joshua kind of like Hulk out into the Phoenix when that happens in front of him, and then he's sold into basically slavery as a slave soldier to the Empire for like 13 years, and like when we catch him at the start of the game, and how he's like has that the memories of the Ifrit versus Phoenix thing living within him, and how like that's what drives him. Is like he wants to find the one that murdered his brother, until then he realized that the one that murdered his brother was him. And even though like some of the trailers have where you just see the scene where he's like, come to me, Ifrit, and then it transforms that, it's like the trailers doesn't make it clear, like doesn't really make clear the whole dominant relationship of things, that's still quite a reveal, realizing that the thing that has tortured him and how he was like trying to like compartmentalize it is that he was the one that became this thing that murdered the person that he has sworn his life to protect. And the moment where then he accepts that, and through that acceptance realizing that this is a world for the people that handle magic and ether and all that are shunned by society, are used as just either slaves or things to be thrown, and him meeting Sid and realizing that kind of like something that can drive them trying to build a world where kind of like how Sid said, like eventually he and Sid coming to understanding we're not building a world for us to die on our own terms, but to live on our own terms. And how like when he finally accepts that the thing that happened with Joshua happened, and then because he had said that he was ready to die, or just that being like his life goal, is trying to find out what had happened, and he realized that was him, and him wanting to kill himself basically after learning that had happened, and then accepting it, which is when you get the limit break. Which is that was one of the two moments when
L3 and R3 do accept
L3 accept the truth. There's like, you're not Ifrit, I am, and then he becomes that, and then finally embraces the part of his personality, and then how instead of like wallowing on like the unfortunate circumstance of what happened to him when he was 15, instead use that for good. Use that as a way to like create a world that.
What a message to like. While it's literalized, it's the idea of using your trauma to make a better place for others.
Exactly.
Is just something that I resonate with a lot, especially living in a place where every couple of years you're usually traumatized as a child anyway, through storms or anything else, but also even outside of that, just the idea that you can weaponize your own trauma to use to help other people is just something that I love. So when that was like his growth, and it was so early on in the story, like usually you have to wait for an entire game to see
for that
character grow as a person, but that was a big thing to realize, and I felt with that, and I think that was one of the first moments I remember coming back out of my stupor from the high of the demo, and then kind of coming down through all that stuff. But like that was the next moment when I went, oh, well, this is going to be something special. And
from the story, from the
story especially, and then following from that, kind of the realization that the person that's been kind of hounding him is in fact Joshua, who survived. So not only has he been wrongly blaming somebody else for that, but then blaming himself for the death of Joshua. being a really cool subversion because I was not sure where that was going to go in the story,
Hmm.
especially knowing that we'd seen the Phoenix later on in the story and all the trailers and
Hmm.
stuff. I wasn't sure how that was going to play out.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, how I started compartmentalizing, just think about that trailer, is like maybe I was thinking that the way that Clive was that he would transform into the different summons, just based on him being like the what we learn is the mythos as Ultima, the big bad of this game, which is basically this game's version of God who created humanity. Uh, and wanted to like reset humanity for some like weird nefarious reason, which was a reason for like survival and all that, because like it was about
yeah,
ether and magic completely messing things up, and that's
and
what
we
created.
can. I want to talk a little bit about that once we get to that point,
Yeah,
but I mean, if we want to summarize all the rest of the
yeah.
storyline,
No, but yeah,
uh,
and then like for Clive, like getting that acceptance and following Sid's goal, which Sid's goal was that he identified that the humanity's reliance of the mother crystals, which there are 5 of them in this game, and basically kind of like making these games the analogy of like humans abusing resources in the world, and like people's abusing of the aether from this mother crystals was creating something called the blight, which is what was like rotting the world like slowly into
yeah,
into an unlivable state. But because people were so reliant on the magic of the mother crystals, like they didn't mind killing the world, and wars happening over like controls of these mother crystals and all that, and how Sid used that as a like his big goal is like, I want to save the world because I want to create a better world for us that unfortunately have to use ether, and Clive eventually taking on that goal of like trying to bring down those mother crystals because seeing what's doing that's doing to the world, and then realizing that that's also interconnected to the plans of the big god, that he wanted those like mother crystals to come down because it had essences of him that were holding him back from like being able to restart the world again and keep his survival. So and and that's the moment where when you bring down that mother crystal that comes with the death of Sid, which that hurt because he's such a great character with like the Ralph Ineson, which is the voice of this that dude that he's made many things. Like people probably remember him from Game of Thrones season 2, one of the Iron Island soldiers, but he also recently in games he was the voice of Lorath on Diablo 4. So it's like he added a certain
yeah.
he added a certain weight.
He's got such like a gravelly voice.
Yeah, that just adds command. That just adds kind of like a sense of command to like his presence, and like, and you understand why people followed him. He was that kind of leader. So that came with the death of Sid, us learning about Ultima, and then any doubts of Joshua not being alive were like cleared up there, because well, all of that was happening with Clive. Like as we were going there, we were hearing about this other dominant of fire that was like being taken care of by this like girl called Tode, if I remember, or the name
Yote.
Yote, yeah. And he was like hooded up, and then one time like you see it, was like, oh, that looks like Joshua. Is that Joshua? But you didn't, because he has a different name. But of course he was going to under a different name, and apparently like what we learned that in the middle of his survival after his encounter with Ifrit all these years back, that's how he got to kind of learn about Ultima, and how Ultima was like responsible for what had happened at Phoenix Gate the night of the tragedy, and how Joshua spent many years like in hiding trying to learn about like the sequences that led to that, and that completely changed the outlook of the story from that point onward, because that was when we get the final time jump where now Clive has fully like embraced Sid's mission, in fact taken on the name of Sid now, and in keeping this is like basically it's like how I call this the Ned Stark effect. It's like the character may be dead, but the essence of the character is kept for the rest of the story. In like in like Game of Thrones. So basically, like Clive keeping the spirit of Sid the Outlaw, the one that's whose mission is to try to save this world from itself, from bringing like those crystals. And of course, on top of him being in that mission, then comes the fact that his encounter with Garuda, the first one of the first like dominants that you fight and defeat and kill, and that was the first time you control Ifrit. Then sets him in the sights of Hugo Kupka, which is the Titan of this game, and then how he was able to find your first hideout and lead a raid that kills almost half of them, leaves you with without a base, completely scars one of your bodies, your Gab, which is your scout, and a big confidant of Sid. He loses his eye, and kill so many, like kill like the restaurant guy, kill some of the carpenters, like kills many people like in a brutal massacre before that time jump. And then if they spend the rest of the years escaping from Hugo Kupka, who was scorned because you killed his lover basically. And a lot of that story, like the middle section of that story, is like you trying to deal with Kupka, which the climax of the story is just unbelievably epic. So,
Yep. And it's a real, like, let's use all of what we've learned up until now, both mechanically but also in a story method, because it's Clive's first real, like, kid gloves are off, there's nobody to watch over me. Because before that, I mean, Garuda, you still had Sid. Wow. Sid, like, kind of watching your back through that. And even though he got messed up, he was still kind of there. But this is like the first moment of it's you and it's Hugo, and just sparks are gonna fly, rocks are gonna fly.
yeah, like Hugo's made it his point to find you. Like
Yeah.
he ravages entire cities and kind of trying to find Sid the Outlaw, because he's still thinking of the old Sid, because Benedicta knew about Sid, and she had told him about it. Like Sid had made his name known early on between the groups of the dominants. So, and after you finally beat Hugo Kupka, which is the exactly middle point of that game, where it's like the multi-stage battle, which you fight him in Rosalia first, because he was becoming more bold and trying to find Clive / Sid, that he wants to storm Clive's own like childhood home, which of course had been like left in taters after what happened with the Archduke and his mom, like betraying them, and now she marrying the king of the empire, which is over at the Twins, which is like in the king, like the prince is basically Bahamut, which is Dion. So, and that's where you get a little bit more of some Game of Thrones inspirations there, with like a usurpal of thrones and like cutting out like the actual heir and all that. But we're gonna get to that later. But then fighting Hugo Kupka and Rosalia, and him finally realizing that Clive is the one that actually killed Benedicta, not Sid, and having that fight that ends with not only you absorbing Titan's powers, but you Count Dookuing basically Kupka. And
Through the course of it, yeah, because you kind of do that in the first stage of the fight, and then the next one is when he grows his hands back and all that stuff.
Yeah, he grows his hands back, like when he hulks out in the final battle at in the base, which is in the Dalmatia Republic. But even then, in that moment, it's like there's so many things that there's so many layers to the story. It's like we haven't even talked about the best girl, Jill.
Haven't even touched on her.
Yeah, which is like you find like Jill, you meet her when like in the flashbacks, like she was basically the Theon Greyjoy of this game, like because she was like the daughter of like a kingdom that the Archduke of Rosalia defeated, and kind of like to keep peace, like she was like she came under their kingdom kind of like as a consort, or kind of like she grew up not quite as a slave, but as someone that was indoctrinated into the family. And she grew together with both Hugo and with I said Hugo, but think because Hugo's boy is like the voice of Hugo from Plague Tale, in a sense, is John Joshua and John Clive. They grew up together, and even from early on, you always knew that she really was very like into Clive. She was, and also Torgal. Because like you see Torgal, the beautiful wolf, he's like this tiny little puppy, which they found in an expedition up north. What does that sound like, people? So it's like it's like there's some Game of Thrones things in this thing that are like so straight up lifted that is so funny. Like if you like identify
on the wall of that watch party as the game devs were going through the series, and
literally
write that down.
Yeah, Naoki Yoshida, literally before they started developing this game, he told all the developers, watch all of Game of Thrones, watch all of it, so you know what we kind of want to do with this one. It's so funny. Yeah, so Clive and Jill always had you always knew that there was something tender between them even when they were young. Like the last night before Clive has to go hunt the goblins and meet the party over at Phoenix Gate, they have like this tender moment where Jill from the very beginning tells her that she always prays to the start of Metia, always praying for the safe return of Clive and all that. And in that moment,
Remember, kids, that's
Yeah.
a secret tool for later that we'll
Yes.
come back to.
Yeah, so it's like that was being like even from that moment, and Clive always respected, but even then he always hesitated to even touch her. Like, but you don't know that there was something there. That he always treated her well and all that. Then
Right.
the tragedy of them meeting 13 years later in battle, when in his mission where he was sent while he was still the Wyvern, the soldier slave, and the team of the bastards are they called. There's like this secret cabal of soldiers that are sent to do like hidden assassinations to like big during big battles, and they were threatened, and they were basically threatened to what you call it they what I was saying, they were basically tasked to kill the dominant. That they had heard that the Iron Islands, another Game of Thrones
When you think about it, how ridiculous of a mission was that? They're sent to kill
the dominant,
powerful.
Yeah.
Like when I'm looking back at what the dominants can do, they sent like 3 guys that all they know is that they can
branded
use magic.
Yeah, and they sent the 3 branded
all
because
they can do.
Yeah.
They just sent 3 regular magic wielding guys to go kill one of their basically deities incarnate.
Yeah,
I don't
basically,
know what
but it was like it was common knowledge that even if you're a dominant, if you're killed in human form, that's it, because because the dominants we've gotten are supposedly not the first ones. Around that time, it was just like they always keep being chosen after they eventually die and all that. So that was their mission. They had heard that the Iron Islands that came to invade the continent of Dalmika, which is the desert, and that's why you see the early fight that had the hilarious the Republican army frontline, which I laughed hysterically when I saw that thing. Just in context, like just like that, and thinking about January 6th, January 6th be like, then when finally like you reach and you see that they have this girl with a very familiar looking hair. And they're kind of carrying her as a slave, and they force her to fight, and and then Clive realized it's Jill, like who he hasn't seen since that last night in Rosalia, and that prompted him to finally like basically man up and say no more to the Empire, because he had been basically just he was doing the will of the Empire for so many years, while he was just like had nothing to. Basically, how I read that is like he had nothing to lose. When he was sold into Syria, he was just doing that, and finding Jill was like a reminder of his whole life and why he decided to break protocol and save her instead of like kill her. And that was the moment where he actually met Sid and sees Torgal again after they were separated after him being a puppy. And then we learn later that Torgal never forgot his master all those years. So, and how Jill like for a while, like, obviously you see her, but then she's like out of commission for a little bit because they're healing her. Like she's being healed, and Clive and Jill eventually have like their first interaction after Clive finally realizes who he actually was, like in the context of what happened to Phoenix Gate, and this doing the thing, and this not doing the thing that I always hate about like sometimes potential romantic parents, him hiding who he is. No, he immediately was honest to Jill about it. He was honest to Jill. It's like, I killed Josh, or something happened to me. It's like I have this monster, and then the Jill revealing that in all those years after she woke up as a dominant, that she also was sold into slavery after the thing that happened at Phoenix Gate, and the queen just selling her whole kingdom off, that she had been doing horrible things that she never wanted to do, and them connecting through like similar trauma, and then doing this companionship turn love eventually that is like built on respect, and Clive just treating her like an absolute dame all the time, like always looking for her, always treating her well. And then Jill, who seems that she may not have much of a personality, you realize she has more of a personality than initially it seems like, and how much they are the perfect pair for each other, like the best companions for each other. Like they support each other like in anything. It's like there's no real angst that, you know, that there's no like real teenage. I can think about this, like these are 2 actual adults, so there's a big you can definitely feel that more of the maturity into how they handled this relationship if they had instead been teenagers. I feel that was to the story's benefit, because Jill is written really well, like throughout most of it. I know there's so many people saying that she's probably underutilized. I do agree slightly with that, because she gets a big mission. This is the mission when I actually started loving her, which is when you go to the second crystal as you're doing all of that, the crystal of fire, and you realize that's those were the people that basically like control her, and she did a lot of evil stuff, and she took point in that one, and that's when
you're pretty much just implied, but like clearly beneath the surface, that poor girl is so traumatized from everything that's gone through. So I love the idea that it goes from being like, oh, that's a flat one note character, to no, they're just reserved, both because their dominant is of ice, obviously, so they're like the icy person, but also it makes more sense in the grand scheme of what this character has done in their past to be a little more stepping back from everything and not be as fiery as the main character, who happens to be the icon of fire.
Yes, and it's so funny how that works, because you can definitely feel like there's some of the frustration bubbling inside Jill and Clive, how he started as such an emo, like this rage filled, like traumatized person from like the things that happened early in his childhood, to being such a tender man early, like later on, that he's basically such a football at the end, like not even close to what he was being initially portrayed as, which is ironic considering the kind of icon, like the kind of dominant he is. Like anytime that Ifrit like came out, it's like he's basically the Hulk. Ifrit's the Hulk, a complete a complete machine of destruction. But then he eventually tames and controls that. He's in full control of Ifrit, like later in the game.
Super mellow again and flip flopping with his partner by the Ice Queen becoming the one ready to start any fight.
Yeah.
Ready to square up.
Yeah, and I'm just glad also, like, because, yes, there's, like, for example, like, Benedicta was horny in some places, you remember, but it's like, I'm just glad that their relationship never was, like, very, how can I say it? It's like, there was always a tender touch to their scenes. Even in, like, the one that, even I warned you, it's like, hey, there's this scene at the beach after the split oceans where they're gonna be both naked, in the beach, and they're having like a very intimate moment, but it's like it's not sexual in a way. It's just them like basically like drying their clothes after like they were like in the ocean.
It never goes anywhere besides like a kiss on the hand and tender words, and it's like it's
and then their first full kiss, because the sexual tension was always there, and it was also so funny because even like that's the scene where I knew that I loved Clive was when he decides he knew that his uncle was alive and he was gonna go visit him like down at the port Isolde over and the uncle didn't believe that his nephew was like alive, and then he had to like act a play that he only knew that only his uncle knew, because he was the one that told it to him. That's why he identified it. And then like finally them having like that moment, it's like family reunited, and then the uncle making an offhand comment of like one of like Clive's biggest missed opportunities, and then winks at him. It was basically people already knew he always was into Jill.
Oh yeah, and it's like one of those like worst kept secrets kind of a thing, and of course the uncle would pick up on that. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that one scene, because the fact of like Clive being the cloud lightning edgy boy style person, but then that moment showing like a lot of range from him, doing like this very cartoonishly childlike movements to convince his uncle, and then just both of them openly weeping while they held each other was like super sweet. To like kind of mention on the larger touch point of this whole game that not only is there romantic love mentioned, but the fact that familial love is the forefront of this game. I would say even more than the love that Clive and Jill have for each other. It is a story of two brothers, like through and through, all the way to the very end.
The whole Bahamut section, which is what comes after the Titan section, which is as they're still continuing to hunt down the mother crystals. Everything that happens there, which is finally the moment that he finally reunites with Joshua after him having an idea, thinking he had seen that he saw him alive after the events of the first mother crystal 5 years before, and just how like that love is like always like pyramids. It's like he always reminds Joshua. He's like, I'm your shield. that always like that was his personality. That's how he always felt about him. So to the point that is like that's what made when they both merged together in that battle with Bahamut, to then just take that battle all the way to the stratosphere. It's like how is such a great payoff when you really because it's like when you think how the game starts when he thinks that but his brother was murdered, and then him learning that he was probably him that murdered him, to then being able to both reunite and both fight together as family, and in such a way it was like just the like on top of like the catharsis of the moment and the epicness of the fight. It was like how like this game like mixes all those emotions together so well, and how that made when he finally died at the end, when Ultima extracts the essence that he absorbed at the first Mother Crystal, because that was the moment where Ultima wanted to absorb Clive early on, when he identified him as the Mythos, which is like this vessel that is able to hold all the icon powers, and Ultima wanted like a vessel that had all of that to fulfill whatever scheme he was trying to do. And Joshua was like, because he also cared so much about his brother, that he took on that, even though that was killing him. And even in his final act, finally like giving him the full power of the Phoenix to be able to do all things right. And even when all that entire amazing final battle where you just got everything, and then man, I can't even talk about it.
So let's think. Do we want to just go ahead and summarize the whole rest of the game from the Bahamut fight now, or
because
do we kind of want to just because there's really not as much comparatively. That's the first side of it. So the fact that we get this crazy tag team fight between Joshua and Clive versus Bahamut, who has gone insane after, attempting to murder his brother and accidentally murdering his father instead.
Yeah, because that's Bahamut is Dion, and him learning that Clive's mother is basically the Cersei Lannister of this game, like in many ways. And then basically she having a new baby with the king of the Empire of the Twins, which is the name of the city, by the way, the city called the Twins, and apparently she knows something about like Dion's the way Dion was born. I think he was born out of like a prostitute or something. So he's like they mentioned something, he wasn't pure of blood for the kingdom, and the only reason he was being accepted was because he was chosen as the dominant of Bahamut. But she wanted to insert more of her dominance by putting her son that she had with like naturally with the king as like the king, and then the king, because he was being manipulated by Ultima also. Ultima was like secretly pulling the strings and shrouding, and Ultima had actually possessed the child.
Something like that. So. I didn't even catch that understanding fully until later on, because of course all of the dominants, their eyes turn blue usually when they go crazy. So when the kids did, I was like, is he another dominant? Like, I'm confused about that. And then of course he just gets freaking stabbed at the end of that whole thing. So
and completely melts because he had been taken by Ultima. That means that he was full of ether and all of that. So with
everything going on, I blanked out. What happened to the mom again?
The mom committed suicide.
How did she do that?
Because after that moment, because obviously after the big battle between Bahamut and the mixed icon, they both land at the bedroom where Clive and Jill met the mom and the kid,
right?
And then like in his final, with barely energy, like Dion just grabs the javelin and just stabs and then just stabs the kid, and the kid just completely melts because he knew that it was
she was like going crazy, and for some reason I cannot remember what happened after.
Because she was to her it was like she's seeing Joshua didn't like make sense for her. She thought she was like watching things. She thought she was watching like some weird demon possession or something, and because to her because they had the whole thing like when Clive meets with his mom again, and they go into that shouting match, and she talking about like always what she cared more the most about everything is kind of like the respect of the world more than the family, and she had no family because Joshua was everything to her, and Joshua died, and then Clive was like, look outside, look at there's the Phoenix, like Joshua is alive. And even
Oh,
there,
I
you're like,
remember that part too.
yeah, and even with all of this, you decided to like betray. You sold me out. Like you had like no loyalty to your family, and then at the end when like Josh was trying to like get with him, like show it to his mom, be like I'm alive, and the mom didn't believe it, so she grabbed a knife and she cut her own throat.
Oh, I
Yeah.
remember now. Yep. I do suddenly remember
Yeah.
all of that.
Which, by the way, the everything that was happening with Bahamut at that point, because obviously Dion, the big thing was that he was leading the armies with the invasion, with the different invasions. You would see that they were fighting the Ash country, which is the Odin, the Odin armies and all that. While he's like out in the battlefields, that's when he learned that he was ousted from like being the next Lion Throne because of what the machinations of Annabelle Rosefield, which is the Annabella Rosefield, which is the name of Clive's mom. And then Joshua got to meet Dion before that, and it got to explain kind of like the dangers of Ultima. And Dion didn't want to do anything because he needed to take care of like what was happening with his kingdom. And so he basically kind of led revolt, but then something happened to him after he killed his dad, that basically he goes all Daenerys Targaryen on the entire twins and like completely like obliterated everything. That was like, that reminded me. I don't know if you remember that I actually posted the gif of the dragon like destroying King's Landing. That's like what it reminded me of. So yeah, and then Dion Dion eventually, then after that whole thing, he doesn't die there, but he then becomes like he comes later on, but he's like a final big part of like the final moments.
I was kind of surprised that he played such a large role in like the finale of it, where it was like, all right, we've got the main crew, and then there's Dion.
Yeah.
Because I was really like, it makes sense when you think about it because they needed something to fly, and
but also he was honoring the promise he made to Joshua that he was gonna deal with the thing first, and then he was gonna help him with Ultima. So
yeah, which I was it was crazy that they were talking about how like, oh, once you go, because Clive had already taken part of his powers, and they talked about how you kind of lose yourself once you go.
There's potential to lose yourself if you go icon. Like if you become the summon again.
I was almost expecting that to play another role again, but overall, I'm kind of glad it went that way. There's still a part of me that wishes Jill had played a role in that final encounter because of how big of a role she'd played up until that point, and then it almost felt like it was like, I know in character it makes sense that they would want to keep her out of the fight, and she's also used her power a whole lot.
Yeah. Because they kind of said that apparently she lost all connection to Shiva after she gave her power to Clive at the beach. So
I feel like it's kind of them just writing her out of the story, because it's like, okay, why does she not get to do all the cool stuff but Dion does? So that was like, if I had to complain about the final arc, it would be that Shiva doesn't get to be there, or Jill doesn't.
Now, just think about that. Would you have wanted her to also die like everyone else did?
Of course not. But it would make a lot of sense that you've got the character who's been the peer and the partner to Clive this whole time, all of a sudden just like, well, I don't have my powers anymore. Have fun, guys. I mean, like, obviously there's a lot more in there than that, but
think about it. Like nobody else that also had been on that long journey with Clive did it, because they made it a point of saying that it all started with Clive and Joshua and they were gonna do it, and the only reason why Dion tagged along was because they didn't want Joshua to overexert himself to fly all the way to Origin, which is like the big crystal that pops up in the sky after all the mother crystals are done, and that's when the game like just pushes like beyond like if you had any semblance that this game even was remotely close to Game of Thrones, completely out the window. Like when everything when Ultima becomes like such a big focal point of the story, and why Dion joined in was because both he wanted to fulfill Joshua's the promise he had made to Joshua, and also trying to seek his own redemption for him basically destroying his town after that coup towards Annabelle and the child. So that's why, because Clive and Joshua didn't want anyone else to potentially die there. They knew they knew it had to be them. And Clive loved Jill so much, and he knew that Jill wasn't like in full strength after basically giving her a whole dominant thing, that's why she wasn't there. And And seeing that in that ending, it's like Dion died, Joshua died, and then Clive died.
Yeah,
I'm
that's a
I'm
whole
I'm
other thing.
yeah, I'm glad that that wasn't that didn't happen. And I feel like with the with the interactions you keep having with her, the goodbye side quests and all of that, I think that's made pretty clear, and it kind of sets the seeds more towards how you know that Clive potentially didn't die, which we're gonna leave that, which we're gonna leave that to the end. Which, by the way, like their goodbye, especially doing the Jill side quest where they're like the pedals, like at the pedal thing. And then like Jill reminding Clive is like, remember, it's like you get to choose your own path. Like, believe that you do because I do. And then like Clive, that was the first time. Like, it was just crazy because that was the first time he actually tells Jill, "I love you." And
That last moment
yeah,
with that was really close to breaking me when, because he delivers that line with such conviction,
yeah,
where it's like that. I've been holding this thing in, but I've been feeling it this whole time,
yeah,
kind of
exactly.
energy to
And
it.
then that's when
Um,
when Jill like just stares down and then she's just like she takes it all in, absorbs it, like, and lifts up and she's like, I know. She does the Han Solo thing. I mean, it's like, I love you too. And just the fact that when they touch the two foreheads,
yes,
that's kind of what it tells. Like there's
that
a
is much
ten,
more tender.
yeah, is it the tenderness of how they do their love? It's like it's so incredibly touching. On top of that, the song that played in this moment was the Final Fantasy theme that goes all the way back to the first one, and they did a version of that for that moment was so meaningful because on top of that, and seeing the entire cast of characters that gather together at that moment, that's when you realize like the journey you've been through and like why you're doing like those like that final moment and why and what that makes the ending. If you didn't catch all the things, it can be the most heartbreaking thing in the world, or you can see some of the cleverness of some of the things that were seeded to see that it may not have been as tragic as it initially seems. Which, at the end of the day, when we beat Ultima and you absorb his power, then like and Clive tried his last ditch effort in trying to revive Joshua by covering the hole in his chest. And
I think part of me almost knew that Clive couldn't revive him. He
mm-hmm,
just wanted to make him look more dignified in
yeah,
death
mm-hmm,
instead of having, like
yeah,
open
and kind of
chest
like I was saying
cavity.
before I broke down those flashbacks. God,
The fact that we go all the way back to Clive watching Joshua
being
in the
born,
crypt,
yeah,
and like the fact that we see the blessing of the Phoenix on him, like it goes all the way back to the beginning. Like their bond, they never were the fighting brothers. They were just like, I am going to protect this sweet innocent child
mm-hmm,
with all that
yeah.
is in me, even if my parents hate me and all of that stuff. It is just, man.
And that's what I tell you when that game did something. Like how does a brother family makes me cry. Like that's powerful.
It's extremely powerful because I think people understand familial bonds better than love, the romantic love.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not covered as much unless you're trying to create cheap drama.
Exactly.
And it's so rare to see a true like familial bond that has no extra strings attached to it. It's just these two brothers grew up together and will continue to love each other no matter what. And like it's going to
Yeah.
probably sound really cliche, but that's why I think a lot of people loved the first Frozen movie
Yeah,
because
because
you
of the
had the
siblings. Mm-hmm.
yeah, the build up of like, oh, true love's kiss, but it wasn't. It was the love somebody can have for their sister, and that is equally as valid as romantic love. And I think that is exactly what we saw here, where like, yeah, we have romantic love, that's strong, but the bond you can share with somebody that is your blood or your chosen blood is just as powerful, if not more so.
Yeah, when I think of media that try to do whatchamacallit, when I try to think when they usually portray siblings, it's usually either through jealousy or there's always kind of like there's like the inner conflict that even
Yeah.
at the moments where there's slight conflict between Clive and Joshua,
Mhm.
it's like it's still something that it's like on the completely swept aside on the love they both feel for each other, and how that's like what you felt that in the tragedy of the beginning, and it's circling all the way back, It's like this is a much better ending for Joshua than like being like murdered by his own brother, like as it initially seemed. But it's still like so. We realized that was like the entirety, like what drove Clive, no matter what. It's like the love for his brother, his last, other than his uncle, his last living family. It's like that, and that being reinforced in the goodbye quest when they go honor his father, when they go to the tomb, and all of that.
Yeah.
It just like it's like there was so much tenderness in so many plays. Like the Torgal one also like shocking. Like I was like, I'm such a sucker for animal love, and then like that goodbye side quest where Torgal takes you to their old treehouse, and he shows like the things that he had been collected because over the many years before the Sid found the dog and put him the thing in the paw, because apparently out of like always like this he always had that nervous breakdown of like not being able to be with his family. He always like biting his foot. That
the fact that Clive tries to take it off and Torgal's like, "Don't you forget it."
Forget there. And then like Karen is which is the old lady, which is like her. I love her like grumpiness of Karen, but it's like some of the psychos like really endears you to her. Is like she explains it, it's like, no, we put that in because he was always nervous. Until he saw you again, he hasn't even touched his thing. And then when you go back to their home and then you see all the things that he had been collected, because no matter like in 13 years, he never stopped looking. Man, that was like, that melted my heart, because like, well, what a great way to make like such a well-defined pet. And then like even Gav, obviously the Gav goodbye quest, which is the other one that you do, it was less emotional, but it just like reminded you what a great character and friend he has been. But then the moment in the ending when they see the birth of that child after the lady they found at Ash, and that birth happening, and then him real when he sees Jill burst out of the room crying when she gets to see a sky that has cleared up, and that giving him the idea that Clive may have potentially died. And then he is what he tells the baby. Do you remember?
I can't remember.
He says something like, "Now the world is yours, boy. This is what Sid wanted. This is what both of them would have wanted." And he starts crying.
Mm-hmm. That was heavy for me, watching that whole situation go down, because it was like very clearly that handing of the torch.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can almost make a larger statement of the idea between especially American audiences not liking a story ending.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, how powerful it can be to allow a story to end on its own terms.
Mm-hmm.
So like this is the ending, the changing of the guard. This is now the next generation's storyline.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And Clive basically reading the world of magic, because he realized before he does a big thing when he absorbed Ultima and blasts the whole thing and finally clears the Sky Witch for almost 10 hours of this game. Like, it really counts. Like, there's a little pal cast over the entire continent that makes everything feel duller. It's like, or even places that were usually pretty. The fact that they're like so overcast, like took away from his prettiness. And his final thing, like opening the skies and finally reading any semblance of Ultima existence for humanity to then have finally a future, which definitely seems like there was a future based on like some of the things that were in the post-credit scenes. So now let's talk about like the whole thing. So
yeah,
it's very easy to think that like whenever you see Clive after he does the thing, he washes up ashore, and then he looks at like the skies that he's able to finally like see again after it's been like clouded after Ultima's course. And then he lifts his hand, and then you see that he has the curse for the bear that also Sid had, and like that eventually Sid had when he was having the rot. And then you see many bears eventually do that, and that makes them succumb. When then he still looks at the star, and then he says to himself, "Do you see that, Jill?" Before we go to the whole thing in the hideaway, where that's where you see the birth, and then she sees the sky. She sees Metia, the star that she's always been like wishing this entire time, and you're reminded of in the goodbye side quest.
Beginning of the story.
Yeah, at the beginning of the story, that for her, like a sunrise is always a promise, and like it's a promise delivered, that promises that Clive always will come back to her. So then, like, when she goes, like, she and Torgal go to appear to just cry. Like, her cry is pretty hard. Like, when you really realize it.
It's rough. It was hard to listen to the characters crying because those voice actors
are
poured
so
their
good.
Heart and soul into that.
And then Torgal always, like, he was howling, and you understand, like, the goodbye to Torgal also hit me, like, one before the tender, like, goodbye, like when he said goodbye to both of them, and just like it's like it hits more. I think what I tell people is like, I feel how those final scenes play out may play out different if you didn't do the goodbye side quests.
You certainly, at the very least, you wouldn't feel the same, you know.
Yeah, because I know, like, Steve, which is my editor, one of my review editors over at Season Gaming, he actually got contracted to review this game for someone else also. So we were playing it in tandem, and he finished it 2 days after I did. And I asked him how he felt about the ending. And he was like, it was pretty touching, but it didn't quite hit me. And then I asked him, did you do the goodbye quest? I was like, no, I didn't. I was like, yeah, makes sense. That's why I was like, I made you do them because I wanted you to.
I'm really glad that you did, because I wouldn't have been able to find them for one, and then for two,
because you skipped, because you eventually started skipping. So that's why I was like, I don't know how. And then we learned, because if you skipped a few, you needed to do a few for others to start popping.
And it's to be fair, it wasn't fully my fault, because you told me at a certain point to just mainline. So
the thing is that I had not expected, especially because the Joshua one was not popping for you, was like the weird one where everything else popped for you,
which is so weird that it was tied to that other one,
to the Jode one. Yeah, to the Jode one. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like all of that hits. So we go back to, like, Jill and Torgal just being, like, miserable at the pier. And then the sunrise hits, and then you see, like, the expression of Jill just completely, like, change. And and I went to check, because do you read the thing that I sent you from Reddit?
I did. I've read the whole thing because I wanted to, like,
you wanted to feel like
to not just be hopeful thinking. I wanted it to be exactly what we were hoping.
There is, because there's some rocks there. There is a weird one that looks like a boat. That has a weird reflection there to the left, right in the sun at the sunrise. Jill completely, like, stopped crying and getting a hopeful look in her face.
Yeah.
And then you remember, what has she been praying for? That Clive will return to her. And then, like, that's what you hear at that moment. That you hear the narration of the story of Clive saying, and this is when our journey is over. And then after credits,
it says the journey's not over, or something like that.
Yeah, the journey is now over, something like that. And then, like, you make it all the way post credits, and then you see these kids. One of them looks a lot like Clive, and another kid looks.
The subtitles lists his name as Clive.
Yeah. So, and then you realize that there's a book called Final Fantasy written by Joshua Rosfield, and then when you start thinking, especially if you do, I don't know if you did Hippocrates. I don't think you did Hippocrates goodbye side quest. They talk about, like, how Clive wants to write and, like, leave Comet. Like, eventually, like, when all Comet is done, he would like to take writing eventually. And then when you piece that eventually a book with the words that only Clive said, which is the final words he said to Ultima, that include final and fantasy in them.
Yep.
Because who else would have that? And so then it
wouldn't even make sense if even both of them died. Then there would be nobody to tell what happened there. So one of them had to survive.
Exactly. And to me, I think, like, the one that actually survived and was coming in that boat, that you can clearly see, like, if you squint enough, like, how different it looks from a rock formation, that it's actually Clive coming in, because it had already been established that Phoenix doesn't have the power to revive. So it would make sense that in a game that already had Clive take the name of someone else, in order to, like, preserve Joshua's memory, he ghost wrote a Final Fantasy book explaining all of that for future generations. That now it's become like a fairy tale, but with
Clive canonically made fan fiction.
Yeah, yeah, he became the original Ghost Rider, and now then you see kids that look exactly like him. So it's like the only way you see someone that looked like him is that if that lineage was like perpetrated for how long ago, but it's like just the fact that that kept happening, even though you know that with Clive having the petrification thing, like he was not long eventually, but it's just not that he was gonna die in that moment, and that was it.
Right.
So I feel it's like these are the kind of endings that all of those things being said and seated makes different picture, but it's left open-ended that everyone can have their own different interpretation. Me, I choose to believe like those things are like were put there for a reason, and that Clive at the end of the day, like he fulfilled his promise to Jill, like, he would come back to her despite everything. The book at the end kind of solidifies it for me because no one else heard the final line.
There was a part of me that was worried that it was just a flashback of Clive as a kid with his uncle. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like sweet and all, but that makes this just as sad. What is the deal with that? And then the book saying author Joshua Rossfield, I went, wait a minute. And then I had this other equally like almost sad thing where it's like, wait, was this whole thing just a story in a book that the kid was reading? But then I was like, no, there's something else to this. That's not tracking here. So then when you started adding in all of those details, it started to make a lot more sense to me, and it started to make me feel like there was some actual hope on the horizon.
Yeah, and apparently, I think Naoki Yoshida had said that he wanted to have like a hopeful ending, also, compared to like how tragic 15 ends.
Oh my goodness, yeah. 15 was just a pure downer, and the only way you could ever pull some kind of hope out of it was like, well, maybe their afterlife is a little different, and they get to actually live their lives. That's
exactly.
It's like the ending to Titanic, where you're like, oh, good, she gets to walk through the Titanic one more time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
the only fantasy here is yours, and we shall be its final witness. That's the first time in a game that we've heard the words Final Fantasy being used in such a badass way.
Yeah. I don't think we've ever actually heard them even acknowledge the title of the game ever. So it's like, it was a really good way to wrap all of that up.
Yeah.
And my goodness, like finishing that plot off with such a crazy boss fight. I was able to put it up on the big TV like you recommended.
Yeah, totally. Could you imagine? Can you imagine if you had actually played it on your monitor? What you would have deprived yourself from?
I would have ended up enjoying it because like I wouldn't have had anything else. But man, I'm glad that I was able to.
Yeah. Did your wife watch you play that?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
Partly. It was mostly like just me having that moment to myself.
Did she get to see the final moment with Jill? Like their goodbye? Did she get to see any of that?
I think she was still making dinner at that point. So
I would have loved to have. Yeah, I would have loved if you could have seen that.
I got to geek out afterwards though, and I was just like, all right, sit down. I got to explain all of this stuff. I'm feeling feelings.
Freaking Final Fantasy making you feel feelings, right? I feel that's always been that's the trademark for this franchise, that they know how to because they're melodramatic, and that melodrama can like eventually seep into your heart. It's kind of like also Kingdom Hearts eventually just like warms you over, because it's like this franchise is just like wear their emotions and earnestness in their sleeves. And in a world that is so cynical, and this one that seemed like it was going to be cynical, the fact that it had so many of these tender moments that everyone said that this is just a dour world, I'm like, I don't see it. I don't see how you could say that.
It really subverts what, in the best way, it subverts what everybody was told to expect out of it by turning it into, hey, you know what's actually the most badass thing in the world? Caring about your friends.
Yeah.
And it's like, it really tricks you. It makes you think like, oh man, look at how cool this dude is, how awesome he is.
The power of love and the power of love and friendship.
I mean, it's even like at the very end, he hits Ultima with that exact line where he goes, he's like, that's the difference between you and me. I could never be here without my friends. And I was like,
and just getting to hear the voices of so many of us, you're switching through that amazing anime, like all through every single icon ability, one after the other, after the other, after the other. So
each of those people cheering him on, a very Rise of Skywalker, but cool
Cool,
actually.
actually. Yeah.
Um,
So,
oh man, so
I tell
yeah,
you, when I
this
think about it, it's like and no other. I'll be shocked if another game like hits in emotions like this did.
there's
Because
no way anything else this year is going to be able to hit me the
yeah.
way that this did. And I'm actually glad that this came out after Tears of the Kingdom
Hmm.
because I think it would have made the emotional aspect of that game less powerful.
Yeah, I feel
Because
like
this
we've
one
gotten
didn't have
every. I feel we've gotten every game like right at the right time, from Jedi
yeah.
Survivor to Tears of the Kingdom, not to this one. And
Gosh, imagine if Jedi Survivor had been pushed back into like midsummer after
oh
all of
no, no,
this.
it would have been destroyed. It would
It
have
would have been
absolutely
even
been
more
destroyed.
horizoned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even then, kind of like it's what's so funny. Like because I reviewed all three of these games. Like I gave Jedi Survivor a 9.5. I gave
Yep.
Tears of the King. I gave Tears of the Kingdom a 10. I gave this a 9, and this is the one that I think may be my favorite because again, like
That's
it doesn't matter what things score depending like what are some of the things that make you feel. The way
right.
Final Fantasy 16 like made me feel about a brotherly love that just freaking flashbacks destroyed me late at night on a Monday. You woke up. You saw all the gifts that I sent you like
Yeah.
after I was
You
done.
you sent in, I think, like 6 to 8
Yeah.
different gifts of sadness.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just, I knew that you were going through it because at the time I didn't even have the context.
Mhm.
But I'm really glad that I got to eventually, and not even very far behind you,
Mhm.
catch up and like understand, like, okay, this hits just the right way. And it's just in time for me to revisit the other great feel-good game of the year,
Here.
Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah. But definitely a palate cleanser. But this is what I tell you. It's like it's not perfect. Like Final Fantasy 16 is far from perfect. From the three, it's like when I look at the games, at the three games that I mentioned that I reviewed recently, from an objective point of view, it's like definitely Final Fantasy 16 has the lower lows of the other from like those three big ones that we played
I
we
think
played and reviewed.
it
But
certainly stumbles the most, but
mhm,
it's also like by virtue
mhm,
of doing so much.
yeah,
Like there was, you could not say at all that this game played it safe,
no,
and I have to respect it so much because of that.
mhm,
That I might even consider it my game of the year right now,
mhm,
just for sheer audacity of like, okay, here we go. This is my final thoughts on it.
mhm,
Is that, like I said, the Tears of the Kingdom and Final Fantasy are the sliding scale. They're at the opposite ends of each of it.
mhm,
Not only in that capability of like gameplay to story focus, but also gameplay revolutionizing and story revolutionizing. Because Final Fantasy 16 has now told a story that, while a simple meal well made in a lot of areas,
mhm.
I feel like did a lot for what could be told in a story for people to really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's
Does
just
that make
more that
sense?
yeah, I wouldn't say that it's like the most revolutionary story because I don't think it is. It's like
Not
a lot,
most
yeah,
revolutionary,
yeah,
but
a
out of
lot of
this year,
tropes.
maybe.
Yeah, a lot of tropes are like very tropey about it, and many of its themes in previous Final Fantasies were also touched. Some of the themes in this one were also in 15. The big difference here is that how it treated character, and it made like, and to me, it's like just doing brotherly love like it did.
Yeah.
That's like that was and even a romance that I haven't simped so much for like a pair of characters like I have with this. That I've even changed the name of our group chat.
You
And
haven't simped so much for a non-archery character.
yeah,
Let's say that.
exactly. That should tell you a lot. But it's like it's just like because it's like a level of maturity that is not the edgy kind. It's like it's funny seeing this like and contrasted with like the periodic edginess of Stranger of Paradise, which is like that one's edgy for comedy's sake.
Right.
Um, and this one is like overcomes its initial edginess to still deliver the heart and soul that has made Final Fantasy as a franchise endure for so long. And I can tell you because I went back to read my review of Crisis Core. There's so many things that are so aged about Crisis Core, but that emotional punch of that of Zack's journey and how that informs the rest of Final Fantasy VII is like how that catapulted the game. I objectively gave a 7 out of 10 in my review. like it's as my fourth favorite thing of the year, is because it like when it morphs the things that it touches you in the heart, and it just envelops you. Sometimes it's hard to be objective. Objectively, it's like this has lower lows than the other two. The highs are like my favorite. Has more like hit me more in the soul than the other games, and that's why like I'm not afraid of saying that this may be my number one game of this year, acknowledging that it will not win it. Like in general, like audiences. There, I think there will be like some like PlayStation centric audiences that could like pick this one. Because this has
especially anybody who didn't play Legend of Zelda
exactly
or didn't like it.
Yeah, this could be more for them, even with some of its unevenness. But yeah, I'm like glad that I want to keep playing. I think that says a lot that I want to keep doing the Final Fantasy mode.
I would say you could say a lot about Final Fantasy, but the one thing you can't say is that it wasn't pregnant with meaning.
Yeah, it's iconic with an E-I-K. And with that concludes our chat with Final Fantasy 16. So, Paul, read me the games that are coming out on July 9th to July 15, 2023. A few are happening. One in particular that I'm quite interested in.
Actually, there is a couple that I'm interested in. So yeah, we've got Lost in Play on iOS and Android on July 12th. Mordhau. That one's the one I really want to look at on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One on July 12th.
Ooh.
Oxenfree 2, Lost Signals, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Switch, PC, Mac, iOS, and Android on July 12th. Really good indie horror game. Gravity Circuit on PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Switch, and PC on July 13th. And lastly, Exoprimal on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC on July 14th.
Alright, so I'm looking at this Mordhau game. It's like a first-person like melee combat game.
It is Chivalry, but done, I think last year was on PC, and it's
2019.
Really
2019, actually. Yeah.
Word. Okay, so it's been a little longer, but it did everything that Chivalry did, I would say, in a better package.
Makes sense.
And for a while, it was really popular. So I'm glad that it's finally getting on console. I hope that it has a player base that can stick it out.
Yeah. So and Oxenfree 2, Lost Signals is like is that the full game? That's how it was called. Or is it an expansion? Or
that is the second game.
Okay. Yeah. It's the first forever.
Oxenfree.
Exactly. So it's like that was a long time ago. The Oxenfree one was 2016.
I don't even know if they were trying to make a sequel until recently, though, because I think that was one of those. Hey, we're just going to make this
After
one
Party
standalone story.
They did the game After Party, the one that was like a restaurant in hell, something like that. So.
Oh yeah, I remember that now.
I think that's
that
why.
One got a lot of good reviews as well. I remember that.
Yeah. It's just I didn't really care about it, but yeah, it was there. Exoprimal is the one that, thankfully, because we have Game Pass, which goes up in price this month. By the way, people. Brace yourself. That's the one that we're gonna be able to try on Game Pass, see how good it is. If it's good enough in that console, or if we could make it better, then we could probably have a conversation about it. I'm actually curious about that whole Pixel Remastered business that we were talking about earlier about it. So
I'm looking, thinking about it. I don't know how much I'm gonna enjoy going back to some of those, but the fact that you get all six to kind of pick
of them,
from, makes me very happy.
Because it's like finally a way like. It's getting close. Like right now, it's so funny. It's like there's no console that can have literally all Final Fantasies yet. Technically, the one could have been Xbox because, of all things, our irony is because Final Fantasy 13, it's backwards compatible in that console. So 13, 13.2, and Lightning Returns are there. So it's like, but they don't get any of the Pixel remasters. They didn't get 14. They didn't get 16. They did get 15.
Does 11 even exist anymore?
I don't think it. Yeah, I think they finally shut that down. But I could.
Did you ever get to play 11?
I got to see it. I never got to play it. Did you get to play it?
I got to play it for a couple of weeks. I spent way too much money on it, but because it was like the game is yours permanently once you use it, because it comes with like a code, I think, alongside the disc.
Yeah, so you played it on. You played on PC or PS2?
PS2.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But it was still online. I was able to I got with a friend of mine, and one day they didn't get online, and I was just like, well, I guess this is it for me.
Yeah. So Yeah, I'm just curious because, like, with the Final Fantasies, especially now with PlayStation, it's like they literally have all of them except 11 and 13. And
Right.
13, there's always that possibility that they could eventually remaster. I could see, like, because now there's revisionism going around 13, and people, like, actually
Hopefully,
showing it more
people
love.
actually realize
Yeah,
how good it was back in the day.
yeah.
And I still stand by it. It had some really cool stuff, even if I didn't really like where the story went after a while. I did like all of those characters
The
quite a bit.
soundtrack slaps in that one. It's like,
True.
it's so funny. It's like that soundtrack sucks so much that when I was driving the car in 15, I would put the 13 soundtrack as
Yeah,
I'm
because you
driving
could
around.
switch between all
Yeah.
of the old Final Fantasy games soundtracks on that
Yeah.
thing. Gosh, that
So
was a good
and
time.
so before we conclude here, Paul, so 15 or 16, which one's better?
I think I have to go with 16.
16, yeah. I would say like 15 is at the very least, it tried to have it both ways. It tried to be an action game, but it tried to
Yeah.
like have so many things that were still traditional Final Fantasy stuff. So big customization
I think
and
there are two ways that 15 could beat it. But it would have to be like an alternate timeline for me. Is
mm,
one is if they actually executed on all of the plot points that they were trying to do,
mm,
and like if you had a fully complete world that was there for
yeah,
15, or if it was Final Fantasy versus 13 with the
yeah.
original premise
The
of
original-
like the dueling lovers and that
Uh-huh.
whole situation.
Exactly, yeah.
Um,
So it's
yeah,
like
that's
the heart of the brotherhood. It's so funny. Like these two games have like one is about the familiar connection between two brothers, and then 15 is about the brotherhood of that arises of four different like close, four different friends that really bond together in friendship, and that's like really powerful in 15. And it's different kinds of emotions, and I feel that 15 definitely tries to attempt a lot. 16 definitely honed in on the things that I feel
for
both games in execution. 16 is better because it wasn't a tortured game that had to be rebuilt halfway through and take 10 years, but 15 could have been the best. So that's how I see it, but there's still many things that I think 15 does better that I feel both games complement well each other. I mean, I've recently finished it, but 16 was like in their pivot, it was great. I hope that things that were excised from 16 in order to focus on this, if they keep building upon it, maybe they start being like, we nailed this. Let's see if we can bring back some of the complexity of Final Fantasy to be an even more all-encompassing thing. But until that happens, 7 Rebirth next year, Paul. And I can't wait for it. And I can wait for the mixed hybrid of that style of game to be out in the open. Because that's kind of like the thing when you're thinking about 7 Remake. It's enclosed to Midgard. So
I can't wait to see the purely open world shenanigans that we're going to be able to get up to in Rebirth.
I reinstalled Crisis Core and 7 Remake
Oh,
yesterday, so I'm like,
I got a notification that you downloaded Crisis Core,
uh-huh,
which is so funny because usually that doesn't happen. But
uh-huh,
for whatever reason, I did, and I went, "Oh, he's feeling a Final Fantasy now."
yeah. I am. And I was debating of maybe playing the original Final Fantasy VII also, because I heard there's an invisibility mode, and I would just like to see the story through. So
It is a really interesting story. I will give it that. But yeah, y'all can find me at Dork of Art on Twitter,
yeah,
by the way, because I
yeah,
think I've posted a couple of gameplay videos of
Mhm.
Final
of
Fantasy
16,
now.
yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much all I do right now. What about you?
Yeah, you can find me at _Dorsegovia on Twitter, as long as it keeps existing. You can find me on Instagram at Alejandro 93, and also at Threads, the new social media competitor for Twitter.
That's today, wasn't it?
Yesterday opened.
Yesterday.
So same name on that one. So it's like if you have an Instagram account, you can you basically have a Threads account. So you can follow me on Threads there. You can read my Final Fantasy XVI review over at seasongaming.com, plus other reviews that I've done this year, including The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Destiny 2 Lightfall, Forspoken, Metroid Prime Remastered, also so. And my old written content at criticalcorner.com, which someday I'll write something else in that one, because that's my personal thing. Paul, this was a meaty one, but deservedly so for such a great game. And I hope everyone that listened to this spoiler chat, like you're playing Final Fantasy 16, I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did, or if you feel even strongly about its negatives than we actually ended up feeling. It's like, the thing is that the bad parts are worth blasting this game for. The thing is that the emotions overcome it. Like, this is the most epic game that I have ever experienced in my life, and I doubt any game will beat it in like soon. So glad we got to experience it. Glad it's done. I can't wait to play it again with even more context. Right now I'm playing it again also. So and next week we'll just keep things going things as usual. So Paul, always a pleasure. Everyone else, thank you so much. Leave us a like, subscribe, leave us a review if you want. Stay healthy, enjoy the summer, play some games, and
Press X
to play.
Good night, everybody.
Hasta la vista, baby.